Welcome to Lost Relation Chronicles.
My name is Alan Davis, and I work as a mechanical engineer at a prominent automobile company. I was married to Rebecca for 5 years before she took my life and my marriage to hell. We had Timothy, our bright and curious 4-year-old son. I still remember the day Bill called to tell me he and Lori had bought a house in our neighborhood. "We'll be practically neighbors," he said, his voice brimming with excitement. At the time, I thought it would be a good thing. Timothy would get to spend more time with his cousins, and maybe Bill and I could reconnect, like the old days. We drifted apart a bit over the years, not because of any big fallout, but life just got in the way. At first, everything seemed fine. Rebecca, ever the thoughtful one, was thrilled for them. "They'll need help settling in," she told me one evening as we sat at the kitchen table. "I'll go over tomorrow and see if they need anything." And she did. She spent the day helping them unpack, organize, and figure out where to hang their pictures. When she came home that night, she was glowing with satisfaction. "Lori has such a great eye for decor," she said, pulling out her phone to show me pictures of their newly arranged living room. I nodded along, happy to see her happy. But as the weeks went by, those visits to Bill and Lori's house became more frequent. Rebecca wasn't just helping them settle in anymore. She was helping them with everything. She was over there almost every other day, fixing up their garden, brainstorming paint colors, babysitting their kids when Lori needed to run errands. It started bothering me, though I didn't say anything at first. I mean, what could I say? Rebecca was just being Rebecca, kind, generous, always willing to lend a hand. That's one of the things I loved most about her. But as time went on, I couldn't help but feel like she was spending more time at their house than she was at ours. One evening, after a long day at work, I came home to find Timothy sitting in front of the TV, eating cereal for dinner. Rebecca wasn't home yet. She texted earlier saying she was helping Bill with something and would be back later. I stood there in the doorway, watching Timothy as he laughed at the cartoon on the screen, completely unaware of my frustration. I couldn't shake the thought. Why was she over there again? What could possibly need so much help that it keeps her away from us? It wasn't just the time she spent there. It was the way it felt like Bill and Lori's house had become her priority. Our evenings together had become shorter, our conversations more scattered. When she was home, she'd often talk about the projects they were working on, how Lori wanted to redo the guest room, or how Bill was building a new deck and needed her input. I tried to brush it off. I told myself I was overreacting, that I was just tired from work. But the truth was, I didn't like it. I didn't like that she was spending so much time at their house. And the more it went on, the harder it was to ignore. The afternoon had been quiet, almost peaceful. I'd taken the rare day off work to spend time with Timothy. He was curled up beside me on the couch, his small body tucked into mine as we watched a nature documentary on National Geographic. It was about chimpanzees, one of Timothy's favorite animals. The narrator's voice was calm and soothing, explaining the intricate social dynamics of the chimps. On screen, a male chimp began getting frisky with a female. It was brief, nothing graphic, but enough to make me glance at Timothy to see if he'd even noticed. Tim, however, was completely unfazed. He stared at the screen with the same innocent curiosity he always had. Then, out of nowhere, he said something that sent a chill down my spine. "That's just like Uncle Billy and Mom," he said matter-of-factly, as though he were talking about a cartoon he'd seen earlier. I froze. My heart stopped for a moment, and my mind raced to process what he just said. I turned to him, trying to keep my voice calm, though my pulse was thundering in my ears. "What do you mean, buddy?" I asked, forcing a smile. Timothy looked up at me, his wide, innocent eyes blinking as if I'd asked him why the sky was blue. 2 days ago," he said, his voice cheerful and unbothered, "I saw Uncle Billy and Mom doing that." He pointed at the TV, where the chimps had now moved on to grooming each other. I swallowed hard, my throat dry. "Where did you see them, Tim?" "At Uncle Billy's house," he said, as though it were the most obvious thing in the world. "I want to find Mom, but she was in the living room with Uncle Billy. Aunt Lori was there too. They were doing that." He gestured at the screen again, his little hand mimicking the chimp's movements. My stomach churned. I felt like the ground had been ripped out from under me. I didn't want to believe it. There had to be some explanation. Timothy was just a kid. Maybe he didn't understand what he'd seen. Maybe he'd misinterpreted something. I tried to probe further, keeping my voice steady despite the storm raging inside me. "Tim, are you sure? What exactly were they doing?" He nodded earnestly. "They were hugging really close, like this." He wrapped his small arms around himself to demonstrate. "And Uncle Billy was making funny noises. Then Aunt Lori laughed, and Mom told me to go play outside." I couldn't breathe. My mind screamed at me to stop, to tell Timothy he must have been mistaken, but I couldn't bring myself to say it. Instead, I asked one more question, my voice barely above a whisper. Did they see you, Tim? He shook his head. No, I just saw them when I came inside. I don't think they saw me. I sat back on the couch, my head spinning. Timothy turned his attention back to the TV, oblivious to the weight of what he'd just told me. My hands trembled as I clenched them into fists, trying to make sense of it all. Rebecca, Billy, Lori. The names swirled in my mind like a dark storm cloud. Could it be true? Had I been blind to something happening right under my nose? I looked at Timothy, so innocent, so trusting. He didn't realize the magnitude of what he'd just said, but I did. And now, there was no going back. After what Timothy told me, I couldn't let it go. The thought gnawed at me constantly, like a splinter buried deep under my skin. I didn't confront Rebecca right away. I didn't know how to. If I was wrong, I'd shatter our marriage over nothing. But if I was right, I didn't want to think about it. So I decided to watch her. I started keeping track of when she left the house and where she said she was going. I kept my questions casual, pretending I was just being an attentive husband. Where are you off to, honey? Or what time should I expect you back? She never seemed suspicious of my sudden interest in her schedule. But I noticed patterns. Rebecca was spending more and more time at Bill and Lori's house. Even when she didn't explicitly say she was going there, I had a gut feeling that's where she'd be. At home, things began to shift. I couldn't bring myself to touch her. Every time she tried to initiate intimacy, I made an excuse. I'm tired, or I've got a headache. I couldn't look at her the same way anymore. I didn't trust her, and it ate away at me. One day, I decided to act. I left work early, telling my boss I wasn't feeling well. As I drove home, my heart pounded in my chest. I didn't know what I was hoping to find. Part of me wanted to be proven wrong. Maybe she'd be at home, cleaning or playing with Timothy, and I'd feel like an idiot for doubting her. But as I pulled into our driveway, the house was eerily quiet. Her car wasn't there. I walked through the front door, calling out, "Rebecca? You home?" No answer. The emptiness of the house confirmed what I already suspected. I turned and headed toward Bill's house, my legs heavy with dread. The short walk felt like an eternity. As I approached, I noticed all the curtains were drawn, and the place looked still from the outside. I circled around to the back of the house, my footsteps soft against the grass. The back door from the kitchen area was slightly ajar. My heart raced as I pushed it open quietly and stepped inside. The house smelled faintly of perfume and something else, something musky. I moved through the kitchen, past the dining room, and toward the living room, following the muffled sounds I could hear in the distance. At first, I thought it was the TV, but as I got closer, I realized it wasn't. It was moaning, low, guttural sounds of pleasure. My stomach turned as the realization hit me. I moved slowly, my body on autopilot, every nerve screaming at me to turn back, to leave. But I couldn't. I had to know. As I reached the hallway, the sounds grew louder. I stopped outside the door to the den, my hand hovering over the handle. For a moment, I hesitated. Part of me still clung to the hope that this was all some terrible misunderstanding. But I pushed the door open, and there they were. Rebecca, Bill, Lori, all three of them, naked and tangled together on the floor, lost in a scene that shattered everything I thought I knew about my wife, my brother, and his wife. The moment I saw them, something inside me snapped. All the suspicion, the hurt, and the betrayal boiled over in an instant. I wasn't thinking clearly. I couldn't. My fists clenched, and before I knew it, I lunged at Bill. "You son of a," I yelled, my voice raw with anger as I threw a punch square at his jaw. He yelped, stumbling back, but I didn't stop. I landed another blow on his ribs, fueled by the image of his smug face and what he'd done behind my back. "Alan, stop," Rebecca screamed, scrambling to her feet and trying to put herself between us. I shoved her aside, rage blinding me. Lori grabbed my arm, trying to pull me away, but I swung it out, catching her shoulder and making her stagger. "You think you can betray me like this and just get away with it?" I roared, turning back to Bill, who was holding his side, trying to shield himself from my blows. "Alan, please," Rebecca cried, throwing herself in front of Bill again. "Stop it. Just listen to me." I pointed a trembling finger at her, my voice trembling with fury. "You don't get to tell me to stop. You betrayed me. You betrayed us. How could you do this?" She tried to reach for me, her voice pleading. "Alan, it's not what you think. Not what I think," I bellowed, cutting her off. "I walked in on you. with my own brother. And Lori, what the hell am I supposed to think? I backed away, shaking my head in disbelief. My breathing was ragged, and I felt like the walls were closing in. I grabbed my phone from my pocket and held it up and started recording. You're going to tell me the truth. Right here, right now. If you lie to me even once, I will unleash hell on all of you. I hit the record button and pointed the phone at Rebecca. Start talking. Now. Rebecca looked at Bill and Lori, then back at me. Tears welled up in her eyes, but I didn't feel any sympathy. Not anymore. Alan, she started, her voice trembling. Bill and Lori they're swingers. They invited me to join them a few months ago. I stared at her, my stomach churning. And you just went along with it? Without even talking to me? Without even considering how this would affect our marriage? I wanted to talk to you, she said quickly, but I didn't know how. I thought you'd never understand. Bill and Lori said it could be a way for us to explore, to spice things up. Spice things up? I echoed, my voice cold and dripping with disgust. You think betraying me and sneaking around behind my back is spicing things up? She wiped at her face, but I wasn't moved. Lori finally spoke up, her tone defensive. Alan, this isn't as big of a deal as you're making it out to be. People have open relationships all the time. It's not like... Shut up, I snapped, cutting her off. I don't want to hear a damn word from you. I turned back to Rebecca. Is this what you wanted? For me to walk in on this circus? Did you even think about our son? What kind of example are you setting? Rebecca tried to step closer, her hands outstretched. Alan, please, I was going to tell you. I thought maybe you'd join us. Join you? I shouted, my voice echoing through the room. You're insane. All of you. I pulled my phone back and took a few pictures of the scene. The three of them, still partially undressed, looking stunned and ashamed. You're going to regret this, I said, my voice low and full of venom. Without another word, I turned and stormed out of the house, my heart pounding and my mind racing. As soon as I got home, I sent the pictures and the video to my parents and Rebecca's parents, adding only a single line. This is what your daughter has been up to. Then I grabbed Rebecca's clothes, her shoes, her bags, everything she owned, and threw it all out onto the street. I didn't care who saw. She didn't deserve my consideration anymore. I had barely sat down on the couch, my head spinning from everything that had just happened, when my phone started blowing up with calls. The first one was Rebecca's father. As I answered, his voice roared through the speaker. Alan, is it true? Did that daughter of mine... He stopped, his breathing heavy. If you see that bitch, tell her she doesn't have parents anymore. She's dead to us. I can't believe she'd do something like this. To you, to Timothy, to all of us. I didn't know what to say. His anger mirrored my own, but hearing it from him only made it feel more real. I muttered a quick, I'll let her know, and hung up. Seconds later, my father called. His tone was cold and furious, something I'd rarely heard from him. Alan, I just got off the phone with Billy. I told him he's disowned. He's no son of mine. I told him to pack his things and leave the city tonight, to run to parts unknown before I find him and kill him with my own hands. He's a disgrace to this family. I swallowed hard, the weight of my father's words hitting me. Dad, listen to me, Alan. He cut me off. File for divorce. File a restraining order if you have to. Save Timothy from that woman. She's not fit to be a mother. Do you hear me? I hear you, Dad, I said quietly, my voice trembling despite myself. Good. Stay strong, son. You didn't deserve this. When the call ended, I sat in silence for a moment, trying to process everything. But I didn't have much time to think. Within minutes, there was a loud, frantic banging at the front door. Alan! Rebecca's voice shrieked from outside. Open this door right now. I froze, my stomach twisting. Then I heard Bill's voice, deep and angry. You think you can humiliate us like that? Open the damn door. The banging grew louder, more violent. Against my better judgment, I got up and opened the door. The moment it swung open, Bill lunged at me, a wooden bat in his hand. You bastard! He roared, slamming the bat against the side of my head. Pain exploded through my skull, and I stumbled back, barely catching myself against the wall. Before I could react, the three of them were on me. Lori clawed at my face, her nails digging into my skin, while Rebecca screamed, How dare you refuse us? How dare you send that video to our parents? Bill swung the bat again, hitting my shoulder this time. You think you're better than us? You think you can just ruin our lives? He snarled. I tried to shield myself, but the blows kept coming. Lori kicked at my legs, and Rebecca slapped me across the face, over and over, her voice a shrill mix of rage and betrayal. "You ruined everything," she screamed. "You're a selfish, pathetic excuse for a man." I was on the ground now, curled up and trying to protect my head. But then, through the chaos, I heard a voice shouting from outside. "Hey, what the hell is going on here?" It was my neighbor, Mr. Carter, and he wasn't alone. He'd brought 3 other men with him, all of them rushing toward the house. Bill barely had time to react before Mr. Carter tackled him to the ground, wrestling the bat out of his hands. One of the other men grabbed Lori, pulling her away from me, while another restrained Rebecca. They were yelling, cursing, and thrashing, but they were no match for the 4 men who'd come to my rescue. "Call the cops," Mr. Carter barked. "I already did," one of the other men replied, holding Rebecca in a firm grip as she spat and screamed. I lay there on the floor, dazed and in pain, as the sounds of sirens grew louder in the distance. The trio was subdued, their shouts growing weaker as they realized they'd been caught red-handed. I was rushed to the hospital shortly after the commotion at my house. The throbbing pain in my head and shoulder was unbearable, and I could barely move without wincing. As the doctors treated my wounds, the police arrived to take my statement. One officer, a stern-looking man with graying hair, introduced himself as Officer Grant. "Mr. Davis, we've arrested the 3 individuals involved in the assault. However, I need to inform you that they've also filed charges against you for battery." My heart sank. "What?" I said, struggling to sit up. "They broke into my house, attacked me, and now they're claiming I attacked them?" Officer Grant nodded, his expression grim. "That's correct. Based on the injuries they sustained during the altercation, they filed a complaint. Unfortunately, this means we'll have to process you for battery charges as well." I clenched my fists, frustration boiling over. "Unbelievable," I muttered. "They're the ones who—" I stopped myself, taking a deep breath. "Fine, I'll deal with it. But they're not getting away with this." After the hospital cleared me for release, I was taken to the station. The cold, sterile environment did little to calm my nerves as I made the necessary phone call. "Mr. Parker, it's Alan," I said as soon as my lawyer picked up. "Alan, I've heard. I'm already on it," he said firmly. "Stay calm. I'll have you out of there as soon as possible." "Thanks," I muttered. "And once this is over, I want to start divorce proceedings. I also need restraining orders against all 3 of them. Rebecca, Bill, and Lori." "You got it," Parker said. "I'll take care of everything. Sit tight." It wasn't long before Parker arrived at the station, his sharp suit and confident demeanor commanding respect. He quickly secured my release on bail, and I was finally able to go home, though it no longer felt like home. 2 days later, Rebecca was served with divorce papers and restraining orders while still in jail. Parker made sure it was swift and clean. The police informed me that the case would go before a judge, which gave me a mix of dread and anticipation. The day of the hearing arrived, and the judge, an older man with a strict air of authority, introduced himself as Judge Reynolds. He was known for his unwavering devotion to traditional Christian values, something Parker assured me would work in my favor. As the case unfolded, the prosecutor presented the video I had recorded during the confrontation. Judge Reynolds watched it in silence, his expression growing darker with every passing second. When it ended, he leaned back in his chair, his hands clasped tightly in front of him. "An abomination," he said, his voice cold and commanding. He turned his gaze to Rebecca, Bill, and Lori, who stood before him looking sheepish and uncomfortable. "You 3 are a disgrace to society. Your behavior is a curse upon mankind. Not only have you betrayed the sanctity of marriage, but you've also acted with violence and malice. It is abhorrent, and it will not be tolerated." Rebecca opened her mouth to speak, but the judge raised a hand to silence her. "Do not interrupt me," he said sharply. "You will have your turn to speak if I deem it necessary." He then turned his attention to me. "Mr. Davis, while I do not condone any act of violence, it is clear to me that your actions were provoked. However, as the complainant, you must decide whether to proceed with your charges against the defendants or to come to an agreement to settle this matter outside of court." Parker leaned over and whispered, "Alan, this is your chance to put this behind you. If you drop the charges, it will speed up your divorce and help with custody arrangements for Timothy." I nodded slowly. "Your Honor," I said, standing up, "I am willing to withdraw my complaint of battery against the defendants if it means resolving this matter quickly and moving on with my life." Judge Reynolds gave a curt nod. "Very well. In the interest of justice and expediency, I will accept this arrangement. The defendants will be released without further charges, but let it be known that their behavior has been noted by this court, and they will face the consequences of their actions in the divorce and custody proceedings. The divorce proceedings began 3 months after the chaos. Rebecca, dressed in a modest black dress that seemed carefully chosen to evoke sympathy, sat at one side of the courtroom. Her lawyer stood beside her, an older man who looked both stern and calculating. I sat on the other side, Timothy's future heavy on my mind. My lawyer, Mr. Parker, had prepared me well, and I felt confident in my stance. The judge, a sharp-eyed woman in her 50s, entered the room. Judge Jones, as she was known, had a reputation for no-nonsense rulings, especially in cases involving betrayal and negligence. Rebecca's lawyer was the first to speak. Your Honor, my client, Mrs. Rebecca Davis, would like to express her deep remorse for her actions. She acknowledges the hurt and harm she has caused her husband and her family and is seeking reconciliation. She believes that counseling could help repair this marriage and save their family. Rebecca stood up, her voice trembling slightly as she added, Your Honor, I made mistakes, terrible mistakes, but I was forced into a situation I couldn't control. Bill and Lori manipulated me. They blackmailed me. I never wanted any of this to happen. Judge Jones raised an eyebrow, her expression stern. Blackmail, Mrs. Davis? Those are serious accusations. Do you have any evidence to support your claims? Rebecca hesitated, looking down at her hands. No, Your Honor, she admitted softly. Then why should this court entertain such allegations? Judge Jones asked, her tone icy. Without evidence, your claims carry no weight. Let's move on. Rebecca's lawyer quickly jumped in. Your Honor, while my client may not have evidence, her willingness to admit her mistakes and seek counseling demonstrates her commitment to making amends. She wants to save this marriage for the sake of their son. I couldn't stay silent any longer. I stood up, my voice firm but controlled. Your Honor, I appreciate the attempt at reconciliation, but I've made my position clear. Rebecca's actions weren't just mistakes, they were conscious choices. Choices that endangered our family and exposed our son to situations no child should ever witness. Counseling isn't going to undo what she did or rebuild the trust she destroyed. Judge Jones looked at me thoughtfully before turning back to Rebecca. Mrs. Davis, your husband has explicitly stated that he does not wish to continue this marriage. Furthermore, your actions have spoken louder than any words in this courtroom. You engaged in behavior that not only betrayed your spouse, but also endangered your son's emotional well-being. And now, you expect this court to force Mr. Davis into counseling he does not wish to participate in? That is not how this works. Rebecca's eyes filled with tears, and she clutched at her lawyer's arm as if for support. Please, Your Honor, she said, her voice breaking. I love my husband. I love my family. I'll do whatever it takes. Judge Jones shook her head firmly. Mrs. Davis, love is not a word that can erase the damage you've caused. Your actions have spoken for themselves. This court sees no benefit in mandating counseling when the other party has denied any participation. As the judge prepared to announce her decision, the tension in the courtroom was palpable. Rebecca sat stiffly, her hands clasped tightly together, while I focused on the floor, avoiding her gaze. Judge Jones's voice cut through the silence, firm and authoritative. After considering all evidence presented and the testimonies provided, this court grants the petition for divorce filed by Mr. Alan Davis. The dissolution of this marriage is final, she declared, pausing to allow the weight of her words to sink in. As part of the settlement, Mr. Davis will pay Mrs. Davis a modest alimony, reflective of the duration of the marriage and her current financial needs. Additionally, a portion of Mr. Davis's stock portfolio will be transferred to Mrs. Davis as agreed upon during mediation. Rebecca let out a barely audible gasp, her lips trembling, but the judge wasn't done. Regarding the custody of Timothy Davis, Judge Jones continued, her gaze now fixated on Rebecca. This court finds that Mrs. Davis's recent actions demonstrate a lack of judgment and accountability. The welfare and emotional stability of the child must be the highest priority. As such, full custody is awarded to Mr. Alan Davis. Mrs. Davis is granted supervised visitation rights to be reviewed after 6 months, contingent upon her proving herself capable of providing a safe and supportive environment for her son. Rebecca's face crumpled, and tears began to stream down her cheeks. She whispered to her lawyer, but he shook his head, indicating that there was little more to be done. I exhaled deeply, relief washing over me like a tidal wave. Judge Jones closed her folder with a sharp snap and looked at Rebecca one final time. Mrs. Davis, I suggest you use this opportunity to reflect on your actions and how they've impacted not just your husband but your child. Court is adjourned. The sound of the gavel echoed through the room, and I stood, ready to leave. As I turned to head for the door, Rebecca called out to me. "Alan," she said, her voice raw and desperate. "Please, can we talk?" I stopped but didn't turn around. "There's nothing left to say, Rebecca. You made your choices." She hurried over, ignoring the murmurs of those still in the room. "Alan, I made a mistake. I know I messed up, but please, we can fix this. For Tim, for us." I turned to face her, my expression cold. "Fix this? Rebecca, you destroyed everything. You didn't just hurt me, you hurt Tim. You hurt our family. There's no going back from this. I don't want to talk to you. Not now, not ever." Her tears intensified, and she reached out as if to touch my arm, but I stepped back. "I hope you choke on your own spit and die," I said firmly, then walked away without looking back. Over the next few weeks, Rebecca's calls and messages dwindled. She had no choice but to accept the terms of the divorce. Once the alimony and stock transfer were finalized, she packed up her things and left town quietly. Neighbors whispered about her departure, but I didn't care. My focus was on rebuilding my life with Timothy. She was gone, and so was the chaos she brought into our lives. A few weeks after the dust had settled in court, my father paid a visit. He showed up unannounced, as he often did, and Timothy lit up with joy at seeing his grandfather. After spending some time playing with Tim in the living room, Dad turned to me with that familiar, serious glint in his eye. "Got any whiskey, Alan?" he asked casually. "Of course," I said, fetching a bottle and 2 glasses. Dad rarely drank, but when he did, it was usually when he had something on his mind. I poured us both a glass and handed him one as he settled into the armchair, swirling the amber liquid in his glass thoughtfully. "I'm here to see my grandson," he said, taking a sip. "But I've also got some unfinished business in this neighborhood." He leaned back, fixing me with a look. "Is that sorry excuse of a brother of yours still living around here?" I nodded, hesitating for a moment before answering. "Yeah, he's still here. I've been keeping my distance, though. Don't want any more drama." Dad chuckled, a low, menacing sound. "Well, he won't be for long." I raised an eyebrow. "What do you mean by that?" He simply smiled, a knowing, almost sinister grin, and took another sip of his whiskey. "Let's just say some people need to learn the hard way what it means to betray family." I didn't press him for details, but over the next few days, things started happening. The first incident occurred when Bill's car, a shiny SUV he had always been so proud of, was torched outside a bar one night. The flames engulfed it completely, reducing it to a charred skeleton. Word spread quickly through the neighborhood, and I heard about it the next morning from a neighbor. "Did you hear about Bill's car?" she asked, her eyes wide with excitement. "Burnt to a crisp outside O'Malley's. No one saw who did it." I simply nodded, hiding my smirk. Dad wasn't one to make empty threats. 3 days later, Bill was attacked. He had been walking to his car when a large man, unknown to anyone in the neighborhood, jumped him. The assault left Bill with a black eye, a split lip, 3 cracked ribs, and a ruptured testicle. When I heard about it, I couldn't help but remember Dad's words. It didn't stop there. A few days later, Bill's dog, a mutt named Rusty, went missing. Lori was frantic, posting signs and asking neighbors if they had seen him. But the next morning, Bill received a package on his doorstep. Inside was a blood-soaked dog collar. Lori screamed when she saw it, and Bill turned pale, holding the collar with trembling hands. However, I later learned from Dad that Rusty was alive and well, happily staying at my father's property out in the country. "The dog never liked Bill anyway," Dad said with a grin when he called to give me the update. "He's much better off now." The collar incident was the final straw for Bill and Lori. The fear and paranoia were too much for them to handle. Lori had broken down in tears, begging Bill to leave. One evening, I saw a moving truck outside their house, and by nightfall, they were gone. Dad stopped by again that weekend, looking smug as ever. "Told you he wouldn't be around for long," he said, raising his glass in a toast. "Sometimes, Alan, people need a reminder of what it means to cross the wrong person, family or not." A year had passed, and while the pain of everything that happened with Rebecca and Bill was still a part of me, I had learned to move on. Tim had been my anchor through it all. His smile, his laughter, and his endless curiosity helped me rebuild my life, and I was grateful for the bond we shared. That's when Kelly came into our lives. She was Tim's teacher, kind, patient, and more than just an educator. I had met her during parent-teacher conferences and was immediately struck by her warmth. Over time, we started chatting more during school events, and I discovered there was so much more to her than just being a teacher. Kelly had lost her husband, a cop, in a shootout a few years before. The way she talked about him, it wasn't with sadness, but with the kind of respect and love that showed the depth of their bond. She wasn't someone who wore her grief like a cloak, but rather, someone who had learned to live and love again despite it. We started to spend more time together, initially as friends, but there was a spark from the very beginning. Tim loved her, too. He'd come home from school and tell me about his day, his stories always ending with some new thing Miss Kelly had taught him or how kind she had been. He adored her. I think, in his own little way, he sensed that she was someone good for us, someone who could bring some light back into our lives. One evening, after a quiet dinner and a long walk through the park, I found myself holding Kelly's hand, looking at her with a mix of admiration and affection. I knew this was it. This was the woman I wanted to spend the rest of my life with, and I was ready to make it official. It wasn't a grand proposal, but it was sincere. I asked her, in the calmness of the evening, if she would marry me, if she would be a part of our little family. She looked at me, a mix of surprise and joy in her eyes, before answering with a soft, yes. When I told him that Kelly and I were getting married, his reaction was priceless. His face lit up like a Christmas tree, and without hesitation, he ran to his teacher the next morning and announced to the entire class, "Miss Kelly is going to be my mom now." The entire class burst into applause, and even Kelly's eyes welled up with happy tears. Dear listeners, please share your thoughts in the comments section below, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe.
My lover got out of bed and went to his adjoining hotel room to get ready for the day. We always booked 2 adjoining rooms with a connecting door to avoid suspicion. It wouldn't be good if our affair was discovered. I was Dan's executive assistant, and we had worked together for over 2 years, being lovers for most of that time. Due to my role, we often traveled together across the country for meetings and conferences, giving us plenty of time together without raising eyebrows. I was married and my husband stayed at home. My marriage was a fast wedding at 18 after I got pregnant by my high school boyfriend, Alan. When our parents found out, mine wanted me to adopt the baby, but his parents insisted we keep her and offered their help. Alan supported me through the pregnancy despite the judgment from others. After a difficult labor, we welcomed our daughter, Lauren, 2 days after my 19th birthday, and decided to keep her. My parents nearly disowned me, so we moved in with Alan's parents, who helped raise Lauren. After graduating, we both got jobs, married in a simple ceremony, and moved into a small house. Our plans for university were postponed when we had another daughter, Emma. Over the next decade, with hard work and support, we both earned university degrees while working part-time and raising our daughters. Alan was very close to the girls, but my relationship with them was strained. We often fought, and I sometimes resented them, blaming them for the life I had to give up. After graduation, I became the executive assistant to Dan Johnson, the business development manager for a medical device company. I was 32, and he was 41. We quickly became a strong professional team, and I loved my job. Sales were increasing, management was happy, and I got a raise. My job involved a lot of travel, often with Dan, which was exciting. We visited new places, met clients, negotiated deals, and interacted with executives. Though I was away from home 3 weeks out of 4, the experience was fantastic. Dan and I spent a lot of time together and became close despite our age difference. He was married with 3 young children. To prevent Alan from worrying about my travels, I lied that I mostly traveled alone or with another woman and downplayed my relationship with Dan. In truth, I was fascinated and attracted to Dan. We often found cozy restaurants for dinner, wine, and long conversations. About 6 months in, after landing a big sales order, we celebrated with a special dinner and champagne. That night, Dan confessed his love for me. My heart raced, and after a moment of hesitation, I followed him to his room. We spent the night together. The next morning, I felt guilty but justified it as an experience I deserved since I hadn't had the chance to explore relationships when I was younger. I also realized I had forgotten Emma's 11th birthday the night before. Despite the guilt, I acknowledged my involvement as Dan smiled and squeezed my hand on the plane home. When I got home, the guilt hit me again. Alan was happy to see me after a week away, but I avoided his hugs and kisses. That night, I declined his advances, claiming I was tired. though I was also sore from being with Dan. It was the first time I had ever turned Alan down. Our affair, which began 18 months ago, continued nonstop. Over time, I got over the guilt and hid my secret from Alan, emotionally disconnecting from him and our girls. My thoughts were always about Dan. Lying became second nature, and I didn't feel guilty anymore. I had fallen deeply in love with Dan and occasionally thought about leaving Alan for him. As our company expanded, Dan and I traveled more often for work. When there were no scheduled trips, we created fake business trips and spent the night in a nearby hotel. We also took short vacations together, using conferences as an alibi. We were careful at work, always behaving professionally and never meeting alone. We communicated through secret email accounts and never met in our town. At home, I argued with Alan about my demanding boss and frequent travel. He often suggested finding a job with less travel, but I told him I was learning too much and earning well. During rare work events with partners, we were very cautious, briefly introducing our spouses before mingling with others. No one suspected anything. Alan was happy with my career success, but annoyed by my frequent absences, which left him to handle most of the child rearing on top of his IT job. Although I still loved Alan, we were drifting apart, and our affection had dwindled. I felt guilty and made a mental note to try to make it up to him.
We had a rough start in life early on, having our first child at 16, getting married at 18, and having another shortly thereafter. Through hard work and teamwork, we managed to graduate from university, me with a degree in information technology and Amy with a degree in commerce, all while raising 2 girls. We overlooked the difficulties because we loved each other deeply. When Amy got her first professional job after graduation about 2 years ago, she was overjoyed, and I was very proud of her. Finally, we were both working professionally, earning a good salary, and could begin enjoying a normal life together. At first, I supported her career in every way I could, but I grew increasingly resentful of the long hours she worked and the amount of traveling she did. She left home around 7 in the morning and usually didn't get home until 6 or 7 in the evening. Most weeks, she would be gone for at least 1 or 2 nights, sometimes more. And occasionally, she wouldn't get home until Saturday afternoon. When she was home during the week, she either worked after dinner or just sat in front of the TV. On Saturdays, she would sleep late and then go shopping. On Sundays, she would go to the gym in the morning and then have lunch with her girlfriends. She was usually too tired to go out with me in the evening. We didn't spend much family time together. She was always too busy at work to take vacations, so the girls and I often vacationed without her. I noticed that her character was changing. The loving wife and mother was gone, replaced by a selfish, often irritated, and aloof person sharing my bed. Whenever I tried to bring it up, I was immediately rebuffed. She would say it was just my imagination, or that she was tired from work, or she was working hard for us, or that everything was fine. I worried about how it might end. At the end of her first year, I was required to accompany her to a Christmas party at the CEO's mansion. It was there that I first met her boss, Dan, and his wife. We chatted politely but briefly about nothing. Then he bowed out and they went off to socialize. My wife led me to others and started a conversation with the other employees. Later, I thought it was a bit odd. Her boss seemed quite friendly, though a bit reserved, not the ogre Amy had described. Dan's wife was also very pleasant. Since Amy was his executive assistant, I thought we would have more than just polite cursory conversation. I also sensed that Amy was a little tense. She had a habit of talking really fast when she was nervous, and it gave her away. I thought it was odd that she was nervous around her boss when they worked so closely together. It was perplexing to me. Although I trusted her completely, I still put the thought aside for later. Over the next year, I was very busy as I decided to start my own IT consulting company. Additionally, I was practically single-handedly raising our girls, so I pushed all concerns about Amy to the back burner. Life with Amy was a repeat of the previous year. She started traveling even more often and becoming more distant from all 3 of us. Lately, I began to notice that her attitude toward me was becoming condescending and dismissive. She showed me no love, no affection, nothing. Only occasionally did I receive something without any love or closeness. It was obvious that our relationship was crumbling. At the end of the year, I again attended her staff Christmas party. Our interaction with her boss was a repeat of the previous meeting. Afterward, a fleeting thought crossed my mind that she was hiding something. For the first time since we met at 18, I began to doubt her. Was there another man in her life? The thought was almost overwhelming. We had fought together as a team, overcoming many challenges to get where we were. Now she wouldn't do that, would she? What was I supposed to do? I didn't go to the extreme of hiring a private investigator or hacking into her computer, but I began to observe her more closely. I couldn't see anything out of the ordinary. Either it was my imagination, or she was very clever at covering her tracks. Either way, all was not well between us. I guess I was just too busy to bother. Meanwhile, my girls were growing up rapidly. We spent a lot of time together and were very close, although, unfortunately, their mother had little time for them. Both girls were avid soccer players, so every Saturday morning during the season, I went to watch them play. It was the highlight of my week. After the game, we would go out for lunch somewhere, usually to their favorite Japanese restaurant, and chat about what they were doing. I noticed that they almost never mentioned their mother. Afterwards, depending on the weather, we would walk on the beach, go to the movies, or go out with friends. After the first game of the season was over, Emma came up to me accompanied by a new member of the soccer team. She was a charming girl, tall, absolutely beautiful, with a wide smile, long dark hair, and deep dark brown eyes. She was also very athletic and had distinguished herself in her first game with Emma's team, scoring 2 goals. "Hi, Daddy. This is Callie. Can I come over and hang out with her this afternoon?" "Hi, Callie. Nice to meet you." "Sure, Emma, as long as Callie's parents don't mind." Callie turned and called out, "Mom, can Emma come over this afternoon?" The woman, obviously Callie's mom, turned and started walking toward us. Holy crap! She was the adult version of her daughter and absolutely stunningly beautiful. She introduced herself as Sophie and readily agreed to have Emma come to her house in the afternoon. We chatted for a while, but I'm still not sure exactly what I said. I know I babbled incoherently. After they left, both my girls burst into laughter at my embarrassment and then smirked at each other. In the evening, Emma mentioned that Sophie was very nice. Sophie had been a single mom since Callie's father died in a car accident about 3 years ago. Sophie single-handedly raised Callie and her younger brother Tom for 11 years. The fact that she was a single mom definitely caught my attention. The following Saturday, as Lauren and I were watching Emma play soccer, Sophie and her son joined us and asked if they could watch with us. I mentally prepared myself to meet her again and was determined not to look foolish. We chatted during the game. She had recently moved to town for a new job and didn't know many people yet. She was very happy that Callie had made a new friend in Emma and complimented me on my good manners. After the match, Emma asked if Callie could come to our house. "Sure, Emma, that would be great if that's okay with you, Sophie." "Sure. Why don't Callie come over now and have lunch with us?" "Do you like sushi?" "Yes, I love it." "Great, it's a deal. In fact, why don't all 3 of you have lunch with us?" I muttered. "Thank you so much for the invitation, Alan. But I'll be in the way of your family, so I won't be coming." I was feeling a little overwhelmed when Lauren spoke up. "No, please come, Sophie. It would be really nice to have you with us, and I'd get a woman to talk to for a change. You would be absolutely out of the way, please." She looked at me. "If you're sure I won't get in the way, Alan, that would be wonderful." I shook my head and mumbled something incoherent again as we turned to walk to our cars. Lauren turned to me with a smirk and winked. Lunch was a great success. We, meaning mostly the 4 girls, chatted for almost 2 hours. I think Tom was glad of the other man's company, and we talked a bit amongst ourselves about computers and soccer. At one point, I heard Sophie very casually ask my girls if their mom ever came to watch their soccer games. Lauren's answer surprised me. "No, never. She's not really interested in us. She's only interested in her work and herself. Daddy is our mom, too. He's the only one who cares about us." Sophie cast an inquisitive glance at me. During the rest of the soccer season, we got into the habit of having lunch together after every game. Emma and Callie became close friends and alternated between our houses after the game and sometimes after school. Sometimes Tom would come over with his sister too, but more often than not, he wanted to spend time with me. We often fiddled with computers, kicked a ball around, or rode bikes. I also noticed that Lauren often stopped by Sophie's house, and the 2 of them would sometimes go shopping and then stop for coffee and a chat. I noticed that my girls never mentioned Sophie to their mother, and neither did I. Sophie and I were becoming firm friends too. Since I was pretty much a single parent like her, it was much easier for us to help each other with parenting. After soccer season ended, we were increasingly alone with the kids on Saturdays when they went on their own field trips or to visit friends. When my wife wasn't usually around, I was pretty much free. So increasingly, Sophie and I spent that time in each other's company, walking, eating lunch, or watching movies. I looked forward to our meetings more and more and realized that I had fallen in love with her. Despite this, we never crossed the line of friendship. One day, over a cup of coffee with Sophie, I told her that I appreciated her spending time with Lauren. You know she's never quiet about you when she gets home. Sophie this, Sophie that, I laughed. Well, and Tom is never quiet about you when he comes to see you. Alan this, Alan that, she laughed back. Seriously, he needs a male figure in his life, so I appreciate you spending time with him. Then she suddenly said, Forgive me for being blunt, Alan, but it seems pretty obvious that all is not well between you and your wife. We never discussed Amy. Carefully avoiding the subject, I sat in silence for about 30 seconds. It was a question I had long pushed to the back of my mind and avoided discussing. The truth is, Sophie, if it weren't for the girls, I'd probably be long gone. Things have been really bad for a few years now. I've tried to talk to her many times, but I've hit a brick wall. Our marriage was hard from the beginning. I think Lauren told you about how Amy and I got married. Yes, and she blames herself a bit for putting you in that situation. I know it's crazy, and I tell her it's not her fault in the slightest. That opened the floodgates for me. I spent the next hour pouring out all my sorrows on Sophie. At the end, she came over and gave me a big hug. It was my first real female hug in forever. I'm here for you whenever you need me, Alan. You know that. I only hugged her tighter and didn't let her go. Soon another year was over, and the annual Christmas party for Amy's co-workers came around again. My reacquaintance with her boss was very similar to the previous 2 years. This time, I was on high alert. Although Amy and her boss seemed much more at ease than before, something was not right. I had a definite suspicion about these two. Toward the end of the evening, Amy excused herself to go to the bathroom. After a minute, I looked over and realized that her boss was also nonchalantly heading upstairs. I decided to follow her and went upstairs looking for her. She wasn't in the bathroom, so I looked all around the huge house and was about to pass the ajar bedroom door when I heard my wife's voice inside. "Merry Christmas, dear," a male voice replied. "Merry Christmas, my love." I peeked through the crack of the door and saw Amy and her boss kissing passionately with their arms wrapped around each other. I quickly backed away in shock. I went downstairs pondering what to do. I was beyond angry, feeling just dead inside. I don't have a temper, so instead of an immediate confrontation, I calmed myself and decided to investigate and make a plan first. Amy returned shortly afterward, a little out of breath, and spent the rest of the evening pretending to be my loving wife. I, on the other hand, pretended that nothing had happened. By New Year's Eve, working while Amy slept, I hacked into her phone and laptop. Amy should have known better. Keeping evidence on your personal computer, even if it's well hidden, isn't very smart when your husband's occupation is computer hacking. My worst fears were realized. There was a trail of evidence in her work, personal, and secret email accounts. Amy was in a long-term affair with her boss that began over 2 years ago. I also discovered photos and videos showing the depth of her betrayal. From their email correspondence, I realized that Amy and Dan had even discussed leaving their partners to be together. She seemed interested, but her lover was more cautious. I really was a clueless husband. I installed a covert surveillance program on her phone and laptop. I could remotely monitor her every electronic and physical move if I wanted to. My marriage was clearly over. Now I needed to retain custody of my daughters and protect my business and finances. In the new year, I consulted with a divorce attorney. She told me that divorces are no fault, so you can't sue for infidelity. However, in a child custody case, once the children turn 14, they have the right to decide which parent they want to live with after the marriage breaks up. She also came up with a strategy to protect my company from financial payouts. Emma would turn 14 in 6 months. Until then, I could tolerate living with Amy, and that gave me time to prepare. I had to keep everything a secret from Amy. I told Sophie what I had found out, and she cried. It was unexpected. I thought I should be the one most upset and in need of a hug. I held her for a while as she tearfully told me that her husband had been homicided while driving with his secretary. When she went through his belongings after his pass away, she discovered that they had been having an affair. This made his loss even more difficult. When she recovered, we talked more, and I told her about my plans to leave Amy. She grinned and encouraged me to put my plans into action. I first convinced my wife that since we were both making good money now, we should sell our small house and rent a bigger place. While we looked for our dream home, We would use the money from the sale to put a down payment on a new house. She readily agreed. Our house sold quickly and we rented another place nearby. I was a tenant on a lease for only 6 months. I was very sick of sharing a bed with Amy when she was home. When we moved into the rental house, I got a bad cold. I used that as an excuse to move into the spare room so I wouldn't have to sleep with her. I never moved back in, and she never commented on it. Maybe she didn't notice, or maybe she just liked it. Then I talked my father, whom I also confided in, into starting a new IT company that he himself owned. I was his only employee. I then closed my own company and started running my business through his company. Everything was going according to plan, until I ran into a very nervous and scared Lauren. Lauren was dating her first boyfriend, and I immediately thought she was pregnant, just like what happened to her mom. "Dad, this is hard for me to tell you, but Mom is having an affair with her boss." I was shocked that she knew, and was speechless for a moment. "Really? What makes you think that?" "Well, right after we moved, Emma and I went back to our old house to pick up some things she'd forgotten. Mom and her boss were there." "Well, that's a little weird, but it doesn't prove anything," I said. "I know about their affair, Lauren. I've known for a long time." "Then why don't you do something about this cheating woman? Emma saw her too." "Yes." I called out to Emma, who was hiding within earshot around the corner, and she bashfully entered the room. I hugged them both tightly. I knew how awful it was for them to see this, especially young Emma. "Can you both keep a very big secret?" They nodded. "I plan on leaving your mom soon. I'm just waiting until Emma turns 14 so you both can legally choose who to live with." They both shouted in unison. "It won't be easy to keep this secret, but until then we mustn't do anything to alert your mother." They smiled conspiratorially. Afterwards, I asked Sophie to have a chat with Lauren. She had her first boyfriend now, and I didn't want her to follow in her mother's footsteps. Fortunately, Amy didn't show up often, so we could tolerate her occasional presence and keep our secret. We enjoyed it even more when she wasn't home. Knowing that the end was near, we spent more and more time with Sophie and her 2 children, often having lunch at each other's houses or going out together. One Friday afternoon, when my wife was supposedly at a conference all weekend, but was actually with her boss at the hotel, Lauren said, "Daddy, I'm going to babysit for Sophie today." "Oh, really? What's she doing?" "Going to dinner with a guy at Brazier Paris. You know that classy French restaurant in town?" I immediately felt real jealousy and tried unsuccessfully not to show it. My daughter looked at me with a pitying expression on her face. "She's going on a date with you, you idiot. It's about time you two went on a proper date." "I've already made reservations, so call her now and ask her out properly," she said, holding out her phone to me. "What if she doesn't want to go on a date with me? We're just friends after all. I don't want her to feel awkward. How you ever managed to be smart enough to graduate from university is beyond me. Call her now." I called, and Sophie, judging by the sound of my voice, was absolutely thrilled and immediately agreed. Somehow I got the feeling that it wasn't a surprise. It took me 3 tries that night before my girls were satisfied that I was appropriately dressed for dinner. Just as I was about to leave, Callie and Tom walked in. In response to my perplexed look, Lauren said, "Oh, I forgot to tell you that they'll be spending the night here tonight, so don't worry about coming home late or not at all if you want." She smiled and handed me an already packed overnight bag. All of our children were obviously involved in a determined plot. When I arrived, Sophie met me at the door. "Oh my God, she looked absolutely amazing." "Well, say something, Alan." "I can't. I have no words." "Do you like it?" she asked, twirling around. "Oh, much more than like it, Sophie. I had the best dinner of my life, and we had a wonderful time in each other's company. At the end of the evening, as we walked up to her front door, I said, "I know our children have arranged for me to stay the night, but you don't have to." She said, "Shh, I'm counting on you to stay," and led me inside and into her bedroom. I wasn't going to argue with that. We were a little shy and hesitant at first. I let out all my mental frustrations and felt like I had died and gone to heaven. The next morning, we heard the sound of lots of feet on the stairs, voices outside, and a knock on the bedroom door, which then opened. Lauren poked her head inside. "Good morning, you two. It's almost 10 and we got tired of waiting, so we came in. Breakfast will be ready downstairs in 20 minutes. Oh, and I'd ask if you had a good evening, but judging by the look on your face, there's no need." She grinned. Laughter was heard outside the door and they all departed. "How did we manage to get such a wonderful group of children, Sophie?" The breakfast they made was delicious, and it was wonderful to spend it as a family. Later at home, I tried to justify myself to my girls for what had happened between Sophie and me. After all, technically, I had been unfaithful to their mother. They both just rolled their eyes and laughed at my awkwardness. "Dad, it's about time you were happy again. You're not married to Mom anymore anyway. She left you a long time ago." "So what are all you co-conspirators up to?" "Actually, we're all in agreement. Emma and I need a mother, and Callie and Tom need a father. You and Sophie are made for each other, so everyone wins." "Even if I thought it was a good idea, Sophie might not—" "Papa, truth. Even you should be able to tell how she feels about you and what she wants." "Do I have any say in the matter?" "No, absolutely none, Daddy." From the looks on their faces, they were thoroughly amused by all of this. Now, I was truly at the mercy of my daughters. A few days later at dinner, when we were all gathered together, I announced that I intended to go house hunting the following weekend. Sophie asked what kind of house I was looking for. I wanted to be close to the beach, 2 stories with a large family room, a kid's escape room, a large backyard, and a pool. It should have at least 6 bedrooms in case my family ever grows, because you never know. Looking directly at her, I said, "I also want to make sure it will appeal to the woman I might fall head over heels in love with." Sophie stared back for a full minute, then walked over to where I was sitting and kissed me passionately in front of the children. When we took a breath, they watched us in silence and then exploded with joy, dancing around us. I took that as a yes. After weeks of searching, we found the perfect place. We decided to buy it jointly. She used her husband's life insurance money, and I used the proceeds from the sale of my house as collateral. Everything was ready for a showdown with Amy as Emma's 14th birthday, and thus D-Day approached. Amy announced that she was leaving for 7 days to attend a sales conference on the West Coast. I later checked her email and discovered that she was actually going on vacation with her boss to celebrate their 3rd wedding anniversary on the island of Bali in Indonesia. To avoid arousing suspicion at work, they independently told everyone that they were going on vacation with their families because they were working so hard that they were neglecting them. She would leave work a day earlier than her boss and fly to Bali alone. He would fly in a day later. She would come back to work a day earlier than her boss to make the script look believable. They were getting lazy. Their gimmicks weren't up to their usual standards, as the whole thing could easily unravel if someone checked. Amy flew off to her conference, and we immediately started packing and moving our things to our new home, where Sophie and the kids had moved a month earlier. The Balinese god of vengeance, if there is such a thing, was really smiling down on me. The same night Amy arrived, Agung volcano, an active volcano in Bali, began erupting in full force, spewing clouds of volcanic dust into the air. All air travel in and out of Bali was immediately suspended. Her lover stayed home, and Amy was stuck in Bali alone to celebrate their wedding anniversary. This is impossible to make up. I laughed so hard I almost peed my pants. The volcano continued to erupt and all flights were still canceled. Separating the lovers behind the scenes, I checked her emails and messages every day to amuse myself. The lovers were not happy, and Amy was very resentful of Dan, as if it was his fault. Every once in a while, Amy would call home and tell me how busy she was at a conference, and blah, blah, blah. Typically, I would ask her how things were going at the hotel and ask questions about the city she was supposedly in. When I later gained remote access to her laptop, it turned out that during the phone call, she had been frantically searching the internet for information to come up with plausible answers. Meanwhile, all 6 of us were settling into our new home. I had my attorney file a separation document with the family court. I also obtained temporary custody of my girls from the court after filing their signed statements that they wanted to live with me. As the day of Amy's return approached, all flights were canceled, and I wondered how Amy would handle the situation. She called me one evening and told me that she had made a lot of connections with potential big sales leads at the conference, and her boss had asked her to follow up with them right away before she returned home. I could tell she was very nervous. It's also a good thing she didn't call on the video link, or I wouldn't have been able to contain myself. I just assured Amy that we were fine, and I understood. Another week went by, and she was still stuck in Bali. I saw frantic emails and texts between the 2 lovers. Her boss informed everyone at work that she had to extend her vacation due to a family emergency. Her boss also called me and deeply apologized for causing Amy to be away from home for so long. But it was a big opportunity vital to the company, blah, blah, blah. I waited for his call and was ready to answer, like a dutiful husband to an important working wife. I assured him that I was fine and understood. I then innocently asked him where Amy was going. He began to quickly think of places. I read Amy his letter, letting her know where she needed to be. My strategy, of course, was to make her squirm and plant the seeds of doubt in her mind that she had been discovered. I kept assuring my wife when she called, that I understood everything but kept asking her about interesting places in the cities where she was staying. I knew she had researched everything beforehand, so I always asked her a few unexpected trick questions and enjoyed her attempts to give herself away. I was just playing dumb. During one call, I said, "Hey, Amy, did you read about those poor people who are stranded in Bali and can't get home because of the volcano?" There was a moment of silence. Then she replied, "Oh, yeah, but I didn't pay much attention to it on the news. One of my coworkers was stuck there for 2 weeks. Do you remember Paul Howard and his wife? We met them about 6 months ago." "Oh, yes. We're working on a project together, and he has to do his part of the work remotely via the internet from his hotel in Nusa Dua. At least the Grand Hyatt isn't a bad place to be stuck." Amy's squeak was heard on the line. Sure enough, it was the hotel she was staying at. Paul hadn't even been to Bali, but she didn't know that. Immediately after the call, she'd moved to a cheap hotel on the other side of the island. She must have prayed she could get away with it. Of course, my 5 girls and son thought the whole farce was hilarious. Yes, Sophie's children were mine now. Finally, after almost 3 weeks, the volcano stopped erupting and flights from Bali resumed. Amy called me to tell me that her work was over and she would be back on Friday afternoon. I was waiting for her at the airport at our rented and now vacant house. I'd planned this meeting very carefully. When she walked in, I was sitting at the kitchen table with 2 glasses and a bottle of wine. She looked tired and very nervous. Oddly enough, for someone who had been on a business trip for 3 weeks, she had a deep tan. I didn't bother with the usual kiss on the cheek. "Wow, you got a great tan on your business trip. Did you even have time to do anything?" She babbled something, blushing. "Sit down and have a glass of wine with me." I poured wine into my glass and took a sip. "Alan, I'm tired. I just want to go upstairs, take a shower, and rest before dinner." "I'm sorry, but we have something to discuss and it can't wait. So please sit down. The girls are staying the night at a friend's house, so we won't be disturbed." The look on Amy's face expressed genuine fear. She thought her game was finally over and I was about to lower the boom, but she didn't know how to handle it. She reluctantly sat down and I poured her a glass. I'd rehearsed this speech many times and honed the apologetic face. "You know things haven't been smooth between us for a long time, Amy. Do you know why?" She looked startled and only mumbled a "no." "I'm sorry to have to tell you this, Amy, but I can't sugarcoat it. The truth is that I've met another woman. I love her, and I want to be with her. That's why I've decided to leave you to be with her." A sudden shock struck her, and the frightened expression on her face was replaced by wordless rage. I continued, still apologizing. "I didn't mean for this to happen. It's just that you were away so often and I got lonely." "How dare you do this to me, Alan? After all I've done for you? Who is she? I assume you're entertaining her, blah, blah, blah." I just sat there with a sorrowful face while she poured out her anger on me for about 5 minutes. "I can see that you're very angry, and that's understandable. It's pointless to continue the conversation now. I'll come back tomorrow around 4 o'clock in the afternoon to talk some more. We have a lot to discuss." I left her tirade and walked back to my new home. A string of angry text messages and voicemails followed me, but I didn't bother to respond. Back home, everyone was wondering how it went. My response, even better than expected. For dinner, we had pizza and watched a movie together. The girls turned off their phones to avoid communicating with their mother, even though I made it clear to them that they could not cut off contact with her. Why didn't I attack her for her cheating? Because it would have hurt her so much more that way. That night, Sophie and I made tender love, and all my anxiety and tension just melted away. Amy who? The next afternoon, I showed up at my old place armed with a folder of papers. I was greeted by a still very annoyed Amy along with her best friend, Claire, a lawyer I had never liked. I saw old emails where Claire had encouraged Amy to continue the affair. In the early days, when Amy was feeling guilty and thinking about breaking up, I sat down at the table facing both of them. Claire appeared to be the spokesperson, and offense was the best form of defense. She proceeded to tell me at length what a prick I was and what a wonderful wife and mother Amy was, how I had taken advantage of her while she was away and worked so hard for the family, how I should beg her to come back. If I didn't, she would clean me out in the divorce, take the girls, and I would never see them again. What hypocrites! After last night, they apparently decided that if I knew about her affair with her boss, I would have brought it up. I kept a sad, apologetic, and questioning look on my face. Amy, I realize how much this hurts you, but I guess I'm a little surprised that you're so angry. For quite some time, I haven't felt like you really loved me. You've been physically and emotionally absent from our marriage for the last 3 years? That's utter nonsense, Alan. Of course I've been around. I know I work hard, which often distracts me from my work, but I did it for us. So tell me, Amy, when was the last time we made love? Amy remained silent. I can tell you it was 3 years ago. Yes, we have physical engaging very rarely, but I was talking about making love. I can tell you the exact date of the last time. Remember 3 years ago? You were away on a business trip and forgot to call Emma on her 11th birthday. She tried to call you several times throughout the evening but never got through. She was so upset. I remember it well because Emma's birthday was 2 weeks ago when you were on a business trip and you forgot to call her again. So I thought it was a bad anniversary for us. She threw me a guilty look. Ever since you came home from that trip 3 years ago, somehow our relationship has never been the same. I realized from the look on their faces that I had hit the mark. They looked very uncomfortable and squinted at each other. After all, Amy, we've been sleeping in separate bedrooms for about 6 months now. It doesn't seem to bother you. I can't remember the last time we went out together or went on vacation. It feels like you spend your vacations at work. They both shuddered. When you're home, you're not here with me and your girls. I smiled inwardly as I watched them squirm in their seats. Anyway, Amy, I'm sorry, but I'm going to move on with my life, and I hope for the girls' sake we can make our separation as easy as possible. Reconciliation is really impossible. Who is she? Do I know her? You've met her daughter, Callie, Emma's best friend, a few times. Her mom, Sophie, and I met at Saturday soccer last year and became friends. I think our friendship grew until we realized we were in love with each other. We had an affair and recently decided to move in together. Before they could say anything else, I placed a large index folder on the table. I've gathered some documents and information for you. Tab A is the separation agreement I filed with the court 2 weeks ago. Tab B is the divorce petition you need to sign. The sooner you sign, the sooner we can move forward. Tab C is the proposed financial settlement. Tab D is the new lease on this house. The lease expires in 3 weeks, so you will have to renew it in your name if you want to stay. Tab E contains all the utility contracts. I gave notice to terminate the agreements in 3 weeks. If you want to stay, you will have to renew them in your name. Tab F has the bank statements. I have withdrawn 60% of the funds from our joint accounts. The credit cards in your name now belong to you. Finally, Tab G is a temporary court order for custody and child support. The girls have decided to move in with me, so custody will be handled by me. Child support will be paid directly from your paycheck at work. Access to visitation has been left open so we can work this out as we see fit. They were stunned that I was so well prepared. Claire began, "You creep. You've been planning this for ages. You're not going to get away with this. We're going to take your IT company, your girls, and your money." Well, yeah, I've been planning this since Christmas. I had an epiphany at your staff Christmas party, Amy. I realized it was over between us, and it was time to act. I watched Amy frantically trying to remember what had happened there. "So selling the house to buy another was a sham," Claire said. I only smiled. "As for screwing me, Claire, I don't have a company to take over. I closed it down a few months ago. I work for someone else now. I bought a new house for Sophie to live in after I filed for legal separation, so it's not an asset to our marriage. Since I have legal custody of the girls, I can use 60% of the money from the sale of the house to buy a new home. So, I'm not sure what you can really do, Claire. By the way, if you research state laws, you'll find that once the children turn 14, they can choose who they want to live with. They chose me. You really are nothing, Alan. I bet you poisoned the girls' minds against Amy." "I wouldn't do that. I'm not such a scoundrel anyway. Even if I thought I should poison them, it wouldn't have been necessary. Amy did it herself, having neglected them for the last 3 years. You have a lot of work to do with them, Amy, to get them back. It's important for their well-being that they have a good relationship with their mother." "She hasn't neglected them. She's a good mother." "It's not what they think, Claire. She's been virtually absent from their lives for years. Amy, ask yourself, who feeds them? Who takes them to sports? Who makes their school lunches? Who helps them with their homework? Who buys them clothes? Who always remembers their birthdays and buys them presents? Who goes to the movies with them? Who do they go to with problems? Who helped them get through their first period? Who gives them love and affection? I could go on and on." Well, Amy fell silent. It was obvious that she was having a hard time digesting what had happened. The girls asked me to see if you would meet them tomorrow morning at 10 a.m. at the beachside cafe. It was actually my idea. Since they really don't want to meet you, I'll tell them it's okay. She only nodded. I left them both and went back to my family. The next day, the girls told me that Amy kept bad-mouthing me and demanding that they live with her. Eventually, the girls excused themselves to go to the bathroom and just quietly left. I couldn't understand why she wanted to make up. She had been indifferent to me for years. Maybe I was just a convenient babysitter and housekeeper for her.
When Alan told me he was leaving for another woman, I was in complete shock. I thought he loved me. Despite several attempts to reconcile, he wanted nothing to do with me, and we only communicated when exchanging our daughters for visits. My girls were openly hostile, making visits unpleasant. They would happily run to their new stepmother, which infuriated me. Eventually, I told them not to come unless they wanted to. I had envisioned my life continuing as it had, my lover on the road and my husband at home. Alan leaving was a huge shock and emotional blow. Over time, I realized he was right. I had been an absent wife, focusing all my love and emotional energy on Dan for the last 3 years, leaving almost nothing for Alan. It was surprising he stayed as long as he did. Unable to afford my house and child support, I moved into a tiny apartment, spending nights alone watching TV and eating takeout. Dan's attitude changed when Alan left me. He became too busy with his family to spend time with me, sending me on business trips alone and saying I could handle the clients. Our emotional connection faded. 6 months after my marriage ended, Dan announced he was moving to another city for a new job. Tearfully, I asked him to never contact me again. Suddenly, I was a divorced woman. I couldn't help but think of the line from a Joni Mitchell song, "You don't know what you've got until it's gone." I foolishly thought I could have it all. Alan was now with a beautiful woman who was impossible to hate, and he was glowing with happiness, just like he was when we were young parents. My girls were much happier too, treating Sophie as their mother and seeing me as an annoying relic of their past. It was very painful. I hit rock bottom when I complained to my girls about my situation, and Lauren looked at me coldly. "So, did you leave your father after all?" I know I wasn't the perfect wife and was neglectful, but he left me for another woman. "Mom, he left you because you had an affair with your boss for 3 years. The look on my face said it all. I was so ashamed. Alan had known all along but hadn't said anything. My life was a mess. I had lost a good husband and my daughters. True to his word, Alan advised our girls to keep in touch with me. Gradually, they began visiting willingly and sometimes stayed overnight. One evening, as I drove the girls to their new home, I asked Alan for a chat. We got out of the car and I faced him. "Lauren told me you know about Dan and me. I'm really sorry, Alan. You were a good husband and you didn't deserve this. I was selfish and got what I deserved." He nodded. "Why didn't you tell me you knew, Alan? Maybe you could have stopped me in time." By the time I found out, it was too late. "When did you find out?" "I caught you with your boss at the office Christmas party last year. After that, I did some digging and found out everything. I have to admit it amused me when you were stuck in Bali alone." "Oh, God, I feel miserable. Why didn't you confront me?" "I was angry and wanted you to feel my resentment. I found out you're not the first secretary your boss has slept with. He has a history of using and dumping women. I decided the best way to punish you was to stay quiet and let things unfold. If I made a scene, his wife might divorce him, freeing him to be with you. I figured you'd feel worse if you thought I left you for another woman." "Your strategy worked perfectly. My life is a mess. I'm sorry you were hurt so badly." "Well, a little sorry." "You don't need to apologize. It was my fault. If you had done what I did, I would have walked away from you. Looking back, I was seduced by excitement and became dependent to it. I tried to stop early on, but it was too late. I became obsessed and forgot about you and our girls for a while." "My anger has subsided, Amy, and I forgive you. I've also become philosophical about it. After all, I wouldn't be with Sophie now if you hadn't cheated on me." "Yes, I know. That's what hurts the most. Our marriage was challenging from the start, Sophie. I don't think you're a bad person. You made a big mistake, but he was a skilled manipulator. You didn't have a chance to fully mature and experience normal teenage life, including dating and figuring out who you wanted to be with. You were vulnerable, and your boss took advantage. You're probably right, Alan. But why did you have to tell the girls about him? It was too harsh. No wonder they hated me. I didn't tell them, Amy. They found out themselves. What? They came back to our old house unexpectedly and caught you both in the living room. Remember? Just after we moved out? I couldn't recall at first. Then the memory hit me with horror. What did they see? Pretty much everything, even Emma. Lauren described it to me in detail. My body tensed with shame, and I burst into tears, leaning into Alan's comforting embrace. He held me tightly, consoling me as I sobbed into his chest. Eventually, he carried me inside and laid me on the couch. Sophie and everyone else were kind and supportive, urging me to stay and join them for dinner. Seeing Alan happy with his new family, I felt the weight of my mistakes. As I walked out to the car that evening, he put both hands on my shoulders. Amy, don't keep blaming yourself. We faced challenges from a young age, becoming parents and committing to each other. Our marriage lasting 14 years is a testament to both of us. Look at the positives. Our mistakes brought us 2 wonderful daughters, a legacy that can never be taken away. You're right, Alan. Speaking of mistakes, I've made another. Sophie is pregnant, so we're getting married sooner than planned. You seem prone to mistakes. You're a good man and a good husband, Alan. Better than I deserved. I wish you well. I hugged him and kissed his cheek before leaving, feeling regretful.
Why did I forgive her so easily? For several reasons. Because holding on to hate can consume you and embitter you. Because she was enduring a form of punishment just by seeing me with Sophie. There was still a lingering bond between us, despite everything. Although I initially wanted to punish Amy, my true revenge was aimed at her boss, Dan, who had seduced her away from me. I hacked into his computer and sent him an email disguised as Amy, containing a hidden Trojan horse that granted me full access. I uncovered evidence that he had been embezzling from his former and current employers. I gathered substantial proof and anonymously sent it to both companies and the authorities. At his trial, he pleaded guilty and received a 7-year prison sentence. Throughout the trial, his wife stood by him, but after I showed her incriminating evidence of his numerous affairs, she ended their relationship on the spot. To complete my revenge, I visited Dan in prison. Initially, he didn't recognize me. Hi, Dan. We've met before. I'm Amy's ex-husband. What the hell do you want, prick? To deliver a message. The first one is from Amy. She sends her regards and hopes you're enjoying your new accommodations, which I helped you settle into personally. What? You really should have hired professionals to encrypt your computer. It took me only 15 minutes to unlock everything after I hacked into it. I couldn't resist forwarding it all to the police. After he finished cursing at me, I continued. Also, I hope you don't mind, but I paid a visit to your wife and showed her all those compromising photos and videos I've found of you and your mistresses. Needless to say, she was livid. She insisted on getting even, and I couldn't refuse. I don't understand why she wasn't enough for you. Nonsense. She wanted me to show you these. I spread the photos out in front of him. They had been doctored with Photoshop, but he didn't know that. She said to tell you that she'll never visit you here again, and you'll never see your children. I gave her the name of my lawyer who will handle her divorce from your sorry bum. The expression on his face was priceless. Yes, revenge is indeed a dish best served cold. Growing up, I always admired my family's resilience and the strength of our bond. My parents, Sally and Edward, built a life rooted in hard work and family values. They taught my brother Eric and me the importance of loyalty and carrying forward the legacy of our family business. Even as a child, I knew Tyndall Manufacturing was more than just a company. It was the cornerstone of our identity. After college, I took on my role in the company with pride, eager to contribute to its success. Eric, my younger brother, joined the team too, though our approaches to work were as different as night and day. While I focused on precision and strategy, Eric excelled at charm and persuasion. Despite the occasional clash, I always believed our shared commitment to the company and family would prevail over any rivalry. Friday had arrived, and I had dropped off my Volvo at the service center for maintenance. Instead of returning to the office, I asked the mechanic to drop me off at home since he would deliver the car later that evening. It was a sunny spring day, the kind of weather that invites you to tackle outdoor chores, so the decision was an easy one. As I busied myself clearing leaves near the edge of the backyard, I noticed the unmistakable red gleam of my brother's Corvette pulling into the driveway. Great, I thought. The only time he comes over is when he needs something he never returns. As I got closer, I heard my son Sam call out, "Hey, Dad, what's up in the land of chickens?" Dad? Why was he calling my brother Dad? And why was this the land of chickens? My brother said, "I'm dropping off Uncle Joe's saw. I cut the cord by mistake and he needs to fix it so I can finish my project." Is Clueless Joe here? He added. Clueless Joe? I thought. My name's Joe, and I certainly don't think I'm clueless. At least, I didn't until now. Maybe I should stay outside and just listen. Of course, I turned on my phone to record the conversation. Sam answered, "Clueless isn't home. He's usually not here before 5. I don't spend much time with him." Then Sam asked, "So when can I visit you now that school's out? It's way more fun there than here." "I'd love for you to come, but your mom wants to spend as much time with you as she can. You're her only child, and when you leave, she'll be lonely. Cut her some slack on this," my brother explained. Sam replied, "She promised to spend time with me Thursday afternoon, so I can ask about staying with you this summer." That's when Sam asked, "Why doesn't Mom divorce Clueless and move in with you?" I had no idea she spent afternoons at my brother's house. Everything started falling into place in a way I hated. Maybe I was clueless. Eric bragged, "Ever since I got her pregnant with you, I've asked her about leaving Joe. She says, 'You're great in bed, but you'd be a terrible husband. I love my husband. Every moment with him is the best. But with you, the Zex is amazing.' That's why she won't divorce Joe, but still sleeps with me. Anyway, I've got to go. I'll see you tomorrow at the family party," Eric said casually, like it was no big deal. I felt like I was going to collapse. My world was falling apart. My son wasn't really mine, and my wife had been involved with my brother in ways I never imagined. I stumbled back to the yard and sat on the rope swing. I had pushed Sam on that swing countless times. Now, I sat there crying, the tears mixing with the mud at my feet. What was I supposed to do? I needed to figure this out before taking any action. Then it hit me. The DNA test. Years ago, we all did the 23andMe test. How could it be wrong, unless Carol swapped my sample with Eric's, hiding the truth about Sam's parentage? Could she have done something that cruel to me? As that thought faded, I took stock of my life. I'm Joe Tyndall, 43, and I haven't gained much weight since college. 175 pounds. I wasn't a jock, but I was a good distance runner. Now, between family and work, I run a few times a week. I work as the CFO and COO of Tyndall's Machine Company, a family business. My grandfather started as a blacksmith, and now we make precision aerospace parts. My dad, Edward, is the president, and my brother Eric is the CMO. I have degrees in industrial engineering and accounting, which is why I handle the finances and operations. Eric, my younger brother, is everything I'm not. At 6'3", he towers over me by 5 inches and weighs 50 pounds more. A classic jock, big, loud, arrogant, and often a bully. Eric was a star running back in high school. A small college scholarship got him through school, while I worked and took out loans. He barely graduated, with professors passing him just to keep him eligible for football. With a degree in physical education, Eric struggled to find a job, so he joined Tyndall's as a junior mechanic. Our work demands precision, which wasn't his strength, but he used his name to land new clients. While he couldn't discuss the technical side, he was great at talking his way through things. Don't get me wrong, Eric was good at his job and valuable to the company, but we often clashed. One time, Eric wanted a commission for new sales. It wasn't unreasonable, but he was already drawing a salary equal to mine. I used that moment to ask to keep all the income from my patents. Dad quickly gave in to Eric, but I had to fight for what I earned. I first noticed Carol during a 5K charity run. She wore loose shorts and a t-shirt, and her shape, particularly her backside, caught my eye. As a runner, I was faster than her, but I preferred staying behind her. By the end of the race, I was the only one focused on her. After she stumbled avoiding a dropped water bottle, I helped steady her. "Thanks," she said, smiling. "I didn't want to fall." "I'm Joe," I introduced myself. "I'm Carol. Can I run with you just to make sure you don't fall again?" I asked. She grinned. "Sure." That was the start of our relationship. Carol had a degree in secondary education and worked as an English teacher. A year after we met, we got married in her home church. After 2 wonderful years, we decided to start a family. Despite our best efforts, countless nights and weekends focused on getting pregnant, Carol couldn't conceive. We tried everything, changing diets, different positions, tracking ovulation, but nothing worked. Neither of us wanted to get fertility tests yet. Maybe in a year, we thought. Then Carol missed her period. She didn't tell me right away, worried about jinxing it. When she missed a second one, I was overjoyed. I had always wanted a family, and our Tyndall legacy was something I deeply valued. But the pregnancy wasn't easy. Carol was bedridden for the final 2 months, and the delivery almost cost both her and our son. Sam, who grew too large for her pelvis, was delivered by cesarean section. The doctor warned us against trying for another child due to the high risk to Carol's health. That was it for us. Sam became our one and only. Sam was an energetic boy, full of life. He loved roughhousing with me, much to Carol's dismay. We spent hours tossing a ball around. His grades weren't stellar, but average for his age. However, after his 15th birthday, our relationship began to change. I figured it was just typical teenage rebellion. He used to enjoy spending time with me, but now he was too busy with his phone and Game Boy. When I tried to talk to him, he became surly and distant, often mocking my career as an accountant, especially as he grew taller and more muscular than I was. Over the years, Carol continued to be the ideal wife, smart, dedicated, and now the principal of McKinley School, which specialized in helping students with academic and behavioral struggles. But I started noticing tension at home. Her stress from work seemed to spill over, and she'd make sharp comments about things I did or didn't do. Despite this, she remained affectionate at bedtime. Our bed life was fulfilling and frequent. So, when I overheard my brother Eric telling Sam that he was his father and had been sleeping with Carol for over 17 years, I was stunned. But what did I really know? The most troubling thing was that Sam's body frame resembled Eric's and my father's, but not mine. Something felt off, but I wasn't sure what. That evening, I watched Carol closely. There were no obvious signs of an affair. Dinner was lively, and after Sam went out with friends, Carol and I cleaned the kitchen together. She asked me to load the dishwasher while she went to the bathroom, then returned wearing only a lace apron, telling me to hurry up because she had plans for me. We laughed, touched, and finished cleaning before heading to bed, where I had some of the best sex I'd ever had. She was passionate and responsive. No signs of faking. The next morning, we drove to my parents' house for my father's 70th birthday. Carol didn't want to ride in my Volvo, and Sam wanted to drive himself, so we all went in her Lexus. At my parents' house, the greetings were routine: Carol, Sam, then me. But when Eric hugged Carol, it was warm and enthusiastic on his part, but her response was flat, even bored. This wasn't how a lover should behave after 17 years of affair. I was beginning to piece things together, but I didn't want to seem suspicious. So I casually tested the waters. I asked Eric if he'd cover for me at the office on Thursday, knowing he had no clue about accounting. He said he'd be out for a big project. Carol, sitting across from him, made a strange noise as she blew bubbles in her iced tea, her way of signaling I was on the right track. I pressed further, joking, "Will you get all sweaty from this big project?" He responded, "Nah, I've worked with this person before and always come out on top." Carol's reaction was so intense I could feel the tension rise. The room went silent. No one moved, no forks clinked, no ice rattled in glasses. It was like a graveyard. I realized they all knew. I was still playing the role of clueless Joe, but I was starting to understand what was really going on. Breaking the silence, Dad announced, "I'm retiring from being president of Tyndall. Eric will take over as president. Joe's salary will be 75% of Eric's, but with his patent income, you'll both make about the same." It was clear now. The family business, my father's legacy, was being passed down to Eric, and I had been kept in the dark all this time. Carol squeezed my arm, giving me a warm smile. "So I report directly to Eric?" I asked, trying to clarify. "Eric, the guy who can't tell a CNC machine from a popcorn popper? That's a disaster waiting to happen," Carol replied with a shake of her head. Before I could respond, she continued, "Listen, little brother, I've always been the one in charge while you've been busy counting beans. It takes an alpha, not a chicken like you, to lead. Deal with it, Joe. Once again, I win, you lose." "That's enough, boys," Dad cut in, his voice firm. He turned to Eric, who had been quiet up until now. "Eric, you won't be the boss. I'm still the chairman of the board, and I own all the stock. You'll run this business the way I tell you. This company has been in the family for over 100 years, and I won't let it fall apart. We're Tyndalls, and the legacy is in our hands, just like the men on the wall. Dad pointed to the framed photos of 3 generations of Tyndalls that lined the living room wall. By the way, Dad, I asked, curious, which picture is your grandfather? Dad paused for a moment before answering. He's on the left, next to my father. I'm on the far end. Thought you'd know that. I was just confirming, I said, because I have a question. I glanced at the pictures. I don't look like any Tyndall, alive or dead. Different body type, hair color, facial expression. Eric and Sam look like Tyndalls, but not me. What's going on? My mother's shoulders sagged and Dad's face went red. The room went silent and everyone exchanged uncomfortable looks. I'd dropped a bomb and now they had to deal with it. Joe, it's time you knew the family secret, Dad said, his voice heavy. Your mother and I were planning to marry, but she got pregnant after a drunken night at her bachelorette party. We were already sleeping together, so she thought the baby was mine. When you were born, you were small and sickly, but we thought it was because of your mother's complications. We didn't know until you were about 10 that you weren't my biological son. Your mother had kept it hidden. She'd slept with someone else before we were married, and you looked like him. When DNA tests became available, we confirmed you weren't my son, but Eric was. That explained a lot about how I'd been treated differently from Eric, but it wasn't the bombshell I was expecting. I'd been trying to find out about Sam's biological father and got this instead. Still, I had more questions. Okay, Dad, that explains my body type. But why doesn't Sam look like me? Why does he resemble you and Eric? Dad's voice softened. Joe, you and Carol were desperate to have a child. It was stressful for Carol, and she came to your mother for advice. After a lot of thought, we realized you were likely sterile from your severe case of mumps. We knew for the Tyndall legacy to continue, Eric needed to help. Carol was reluctant at first, but she agreed because we all wanted the family to continue. We hoped this wouldn't come out, but with DNA tests and the differences in body types, it was bound to be discovered. I felt overwhelmed, like a storm was raging inside my head. No words came to me. Both Carol and my mom held me, tears in their eyes, knowing how much pain I was in. My mom whispered, my son, I'm so proud of you. Carol said softly, my husband, I love you so much. Dad added, we hoped you'd understand, Joe, and embrace the love we all have for you. Gee, Edward, I muttered bitterly. Can I call you Edward now that I know you're not my father? Why would you think I wouldn't mind being humiliated by my own family? Sam sneered. Now you know what it's like to be humiliated. I had to grow up thinking you were my father when I knew the truth about Eric. Everyone turned to Sam in shock, and Carol snapped back. Joe's been the best father anyone could ask for. He gave everything for you. You should be grateful he raised you. Sarcastically, I shot back, why wait so long to show concern for my feelings? Why not tell me the truth right away instead of lying all these years? I bet you had a good laugh behind my back while I proudly talked about my great son. Instead, you called me Clueless Joe. Once again, the room was silent. We couldn't tell you, Joe, Dad said, his voice heavy. It would have hurt too much, and we hoped no one would find out. We needed you at the plant. You're the brains behind everything. We'd be lost without you. Plus, we couldn't afford anyone as good as you. A headhunter told us the salary for CFO and COO was more than double what we pay you. I felt my anger rise. So, you encouraged my brother to father my child, not mine, just to keep the Tyndall bloodline going. You kept me working for peanuts to boost your profits. You made me think I'd be running the show one day, but I guess Tyndall blood is more important than competence. I can't believe you did this to me. What's next? Are you going to tell me Carol's still sleeping with Eric? The room went still. I waited for an answer, bracing myself. Carol finally spoke in a small, trembling voice. I'm sorry, Joe. I didn't love him. I hate him for what he is, but I needed him to keep my sanity. She collapsed to the floor, sobbing. My instinct was to comfort her, but my anger held me back. She had done this to herself. She had to face the consequences. Dad spoke, but his voice was shaky. I'm sorry, son, but we... Son? I interrupted, my voice sharp. Don't call me that. You destroyed my whole life, gave me nothing but the bare minimum of affection compared to Eric, encouraged my wife to cheat on me, all while I had no idea. I was just a fool. Now you're telling me I'm not even your son? You've all been laughing behind my back while I played the clueless idiot. I'm done with all of you. You've been screwing me over for your own gain, and none of it benefited me. I'm nothing but a sucker. I'm like a lost child, abandoned with no one to help me." With that, I stormed toward the door, but just as I reached it, Eric grabbed my arm. "I'm sorry, Joe," he said, smirking. "Since this means so much to you, I'll stop screwing your wife. She's all stretched out for me anyway, so I'll give her back to you." The arrogance of that man hit me like a slap. I turned toward him, seething, but as I spun, I landed a punch aimed at his face, only to miss and strike him in the throat instead. His eyes bulged, and he gasped for air, collapsing to his knees. I didn't hesitate. I stepped back and kicked him in the groin, watching him scream and crumple in pain. Carol and Sam rushed to him, but their reactions were different. Sam tried to comfort his mother's lover, while Carol began kicking Eric in rage, shouting, "You deserve this!" I left the chaos behind and got into Carol's car. I backed it into Eric's precious Corvette before speeding away, clipping Edward's new pickup on the way out. My mind was a whirlwind of confusion and anger, and I could barely keep the car on the road. I found a deserted gas station to stop and let my emotions run wild. First, I cried until I thought I might pass out. Then the anger exploded, and I pounded the car's dashboard. Finally, exhaustion set in, and I was too drained to move. As I sat there, my phone buzzed repeatedly, texts and calls from Carol. I sighed deeply. What could I do now? They'd shattered everything. Not only was I betrayed, but my mother had also kept the truth about my real father hidden from me. 3 days ago, I was on top of the world. Now, my life felt like a total mess. The only good thing I could focus on was that I had options. I could stay clueless Joe, keep my low pay, and report to Eric or Edward, but seeing them every day would gut me, especially after what they'd done. I couldn't do it. Option 1 was out. Option 2 was to quietly leave and let the Tyndall family carry on without me. But they wouldn't care. I was already invisible to them. That wasn't an option either. Option 3 was the one I liked. Stay in the family, but on my terms. I'd make them regret every lie, cheat, and betrayal. I'd make them feel the same pain they caused me. Yeah, that felt right. I was 20 miles from home, and it was time to go. Carol's car was in the yard, not the driveway, and I'd packed up everything I needed into my Volvo. Important papers, clothes, and all. Anything I didn't need immediately went into Sam's Acura. Bullet, Sam's annoying dog, whined at me as I left, but I was glad to be rid of the hassle. He left me a parting gift, a big pile of crap next to the house. I scooped it up, walked into the master bedroom, and placed it on the wedding ring quilt my mother and grandmother made for us, topped off with my wedding ring. Carol would get the message. I stacked all the photos of her and Eric's kid on the dining table and hammered a nail through them, shattering the glass. Then I was done. I drove my packed Volvo to a hotel across town, unloaded it, and went to the airport. After renting a car, I picked up Sam's car, put it in storage, and began setting up my new life. I didn't want to be found, so I stayed out of sight, eating pizza and drinking beer in my hotel room. While I hid, I moved all my personal funds, closed joint credit cards, and took the money. I emptied Sam's college fund, which I'd saved for him, and left him with nothing. He'd have to ask Eric for that now. That night, it took some effort to sleep. I kept thinking about the good times with my family. But the truth hit. They never cared about me. So why should I care about them? I shifted from Clueless Joe to Fearsome Joe. Tomorrow, Fearsome Joe would hit Tyndall Manufacturing. I parked a little distance from the office, not wanting to be noticed, and broke into the building. As CFO, I had full access to the company's accounts. I moved all the money into the main account, leaving just enough for 2 payrolls. I maxed out the credit line and transferred everything to our Cayman Islands account. I changed all the login details so no one could access anything. I even updated the address to a fake one, cut off utilities, and made sure everything was set up to be untraceable. I laughed to myself as I finished. The Tyndall men had always kept every business record. But now everything was in the cloud, and I was the only one who could change anything. I had them exactly where I wanted them. I changed all the passwords and login details, locking everyone out of the accounts and machines. Eric's computer was next. I copied files, videos of him with staff, local wives, and, of course, Carol, onto a thumb drive. I didn't mess with his computer, saving this for later. The utility room was my final stop. It wasn't just a utility room. It was a fortress. The main power line entered here, and the room was secured. The only people with access were the electrician and me. I turned off the power and added new locks. By the time they figured out the problem, the power company would shut off the supply. The keys to the building and everything else were soaked in cleaning fluid to erase any trace of ownership. Walking out of the building that had been my life's work felt strange. I had always dreamed of running the company, but those dreams had turned into nightmares. Eric partied with his buddies while I worked to build the business. My family's texts and emails were all the same. "We love you, we're sorry, please talk to us." But I was done. My mother begged for forgiveness, asking me to make things work with Carol and Sam. But the number 17 kept coming to mind. 17 years of Carol betraying me with him. My whole world had crumbled, and I was ready to move on. I called my lawyer, Bob Carson, and scheduled a meeting for Tuesday afternoon. I gathered the documents I needed and planned my attack. I wanted to file for divorce on grounds of infidelity, but doubted Carol would agree to move to another state for that. I also didn't want to pay child support, but was okay with splitting everything 50-50ths. Tyndall's stock wasn't an option, as I didn't own any. Carol's salary was close to mine, so Bob thought the divorce could be quick unless she fought it. We'd serve her papers at her school. Time to make her feel the shame she'd put me through. At the meeting, I also mentioned rearranging Tyndall's funds. As CFO, I had authorization to move money, but Bob warned me it could lead to a lawsuit if it caused Tyndall any loss. I didn't care. They'd have to spend a fortune to sue me, and I was ready to air all their dirty laundry in court if it came to that. Bob mentioned a $3,000 retainer for any future work. I quickly scheduled meetings with 3 companies that wanted my services and access to my patents. There was no reason to stay in town anymore. I had friends who could help, but I didn't want to burden them. My only option now was to fight my way up, start over, and leave this mess behind at 43 with nothing but a new chance ahead. A week later, Bob Carson called. "Joe, I just got back from the county attorney's office. Edward's demanding your arrest for embezzlement, wire fraud, and grand theft." Bob explained to the county attorney and Edward that all the funds were in a Tyndall account that had been active for years. "The money still belongs to the company. Nothing's been withdrawn. Edward just needs to arrange for a new signer on the account." I knew this would force Edward to fly to the Caymans, a trip he hated, especially over water. A month after Carol was served divorce papers, my lawyer called to ask if I'd responded to her calls. I laughed. Of course not. No calls, texts, emails, or letters. The divorce was stalled because Carol was fighting over Sam's college fund and the car. Even my lawyer thought it'd be tough to get those past the judge. I told him I'd agree to split the college fund. If she doesn't like that, I'll sue for fraud. I've paid for Sam's expenses for 16 years believing I was his father. I'll sue Carol, Eric, Sally, and Edward. I might not win, but the media would have a field day with Tyndall's dirty laundry. A week later, my lawyer called again. Carol was willing to sign the papers if I met with her for an hour. She wanted to explain her actions. I didn't care to see or talk to her, but I agreed. I needed to wrap up everything legally and be done with her and anyone named Tyndall. Under the condition, it was just the 2 of us. I also insisted on recording the meeting to ensure I wasn't trapped or comatose. It might sound paranoid, but after 17 years of being clueless, I wasn't taking any chances. At 3 p.m. the next week, I backed my rental car into my old driveway. Seeing no suspicious cars, I walked to the door, which opened as if she'd been waiting for me. No fancy dress, no special dinner, just 2 stacks of papers to finalize our divorce. The marriage had already ended emotionally. The paperwork was just the final step. She offered a drink, but I declined. I didn't care how she was. Instead, I said, "You got me here. Go ahead, start." For the next 15 minutes, I listened to Carol repeat the same tired script. The cheater's apology, word for word. Nothing new. I tried to keep track of how many "I'm sorries" and "can we work this out" she threw at me. But her words were starting to bore me. She even went so far as to quote the family history, mentioning how Edward had forgiven my mother, using the bolded letters I'd written. The numbers were clear. Once a year for 17 years, 24 times each year, adding up to 408 times on her envelope. "It wasn't that many times, Joe," Carol said. "Okay, show me the math. How many times?" I shot back. In a small, shaky voice, she murmured, "Too many." There was no anger on my face, just a complete lack of emotion. When she saw my disinterest, she changed her approach. "Do you want to ask me any questions?" she asked, her voice softening. I met her gaze and asked, "Why?" After a heavy sigh, Carol began. "You know I was pressured into having a child with Eric's prostatic fluid. Your dad." "Oh, sorry," I muttered. "Edward really wanted that Tyndall bloodline to continue." He was worried that any woman Eric knocked up wouldn't be good enough to carry the family name. Even when I was trying to get pregnant with Sam, I still slept with you, hoping you'd be the one to get me pregnant. I really wanted to have your baby and be a family, but I screwed that up. The urge to call her the same floozy name Edward hated was tempting, but I resisted. I let her stew in her own words for a moment before responding. I don't agree with your conclusion, Carol. I've heard that excuse enough times to be disgusted by the idea of Eric's baby being some bond in our family. Carol shook her head, a defensive edge creeping back into her tone. So was keeping up the affair with Eric while pregnant your way of holding our family together? Was it that enjoyable, humiliating me in secret? No, Joe, it had nothing to do with you, she said, her voice softer now. Nonsense, I retorted. It had everything to do with me. I was your husband. You promised not to sleep with anyone else, least of all my brother. What the hell made you think it was okay to sleep with other people? That it didn't matter as long as I didn't find out? I'm sorry, I misspoke, Joe, she corrected herself quickly. What I meant was, it was more about me than you. When I chose to get pregnant with Eric, I realized he wasn't nearly as good a lover as you. He was selfish, all about his own needs, not mine. I couldn't wait for him to stop. I hated the way he made me feel, sweaty, dirty, uncomfortable. After I got pregnant, I stopped seeing him. From then on, all my love was for you because you cared about me and made me feel good. Which you did, I responded flatly. After being with him, I appreciated how you treated me, both in and out of the bedroom, she continued. So you went back to him because I was too good of a lover? I asked, incredulous. That's ridiculous, she said, shaking her head in frustration. This may sound awful, I started. Yeah, the whole Eric thing sounds pretty awful, she interrupted. Let's just get on with this sad story about how you had to screw the big bad man who didn't please you, I said, a bitter edge in my voice. Please, Joe, I only have an hour left to talk to you. I still love you, but I know I've ruined my chances with you. I just want to convince you that what I did had nothing to do with our relationship. You were the best husband I could have asked for, but I have a flaw. I've been successful in life, and sometimes that makes me think I'm smarter or better than others. I lose sight of my compassion and act arrogantly. I needed someone to treat me harshly, and Eric fit that role. This flaw came out when your parents pushed me into having Eric's baby instead of yours. You mean when you were treated like a farm animal? I interrupted, my voice rising. I suppose that's one way to put it. There was no love involved. We undressed, had sex, and I left. No cuddling, no kissing. Afterward, I liked the sex, but not the loving kind we had. It was about his rough passion. His big tool hitting me hard, pulling my hair, no emotional connection. Afterward, there was nothing. No affection, no promises, no plans. Just rough sex when I needed it. Sometimes twice a month, sometimes not for months. Eric didn't care about frequency. The bottom line is, Joe, I went back to him because I needed that humiliation. I needed something to keep me grounded, to stop feeling so superior. It wasn't because you were a bad lover. You were tender, loving, and treated me like a queen. But I used Eric to fix my superiority complex. Looking back, I see I made a huge mistake, and I'm sorry. I hurt the best man I've ever known. I hope that someday, when all this is behind us, you'll remember the good times we had. That's a pretty far-fetched story, I said, skeptical. At least I know most of the facts. Or do I asked, narrowing my eyes. She replied quietly, Yes, you know all the facts now. Do I really? Let's see what I don't know. When was the last time he slept with you? The last time I saw him was when I kicked him in the kidneys after that awful day at your parents' house. I assume he didn't use a rubber? I pressed. She shook her head, confirming my suspicion. Did you ever think Eric's Magic Johnson could give you an STD? I asked, my voice harsh. She only shrugged. Did we ever have sex on the same day you slept with Eric? I asked, watching her face pale. I always douched afterward and again at home, she responded, but the answer didn't settle my question. That didn't answer my question. How many times, Carol? I pressed again. Not many, Joe. But there were times you really wanted to make love and I hated turning you away. I told you I'd rather give you head and that you didn't need to go down on me. Now that we've danced around the issue, let's get to the truth. Did you ever give me sloppy seconds? I asked, the words tasting bitter in my mouth. She hesitated. I didn't keep track of that. I didn't want to do that to you, but yeah, there were probably times when it happened. I can't give you an exact number, but it probably did. The lasagna I had for lunch at Mama Anna's Ristorante was now boiling in my stomach, like the lava of an empty Vesuvius. The thought that I had sloppy seconds pushed me to the edge. Just like the volcano, the hot lava erupted from my mouth in a full-blown projectile vomit. Suddenly, the table and Carol were covered in the remnants of my previous meal. I stumbled toward the door, leaving a trail of small chunks of meat and pasta behind. Carol's sobs echoed in my ears. Guess she didn't appreciate having puke on her carpet and dress. Too bad my attorney had to redo the paperwork because no one at the courthouse would touch it. 2 weeks later, the divorce was finalized, with me getting half of the college fund and car proceeds. Carol keeps the house until scumsucker Sam finishes high school. I'm sure he was pissed, but since he didn't want me in his life anymore, I took my money and left. Since I didn't father that ungrateful kid, I refused to pay child support. If the court demanded it, I'd change the filing to infidelity and sue all the Tyndalls for fraud. No one wanted that kind of shame. Hell, I was already ashamed to be a Tyndall. During my self-imposed exile, I was torn about whether to watch the video files I downloaded from Eric's office. I was still struggling to process Carol's betrayal, let alone be calm enough to watch two people I hated having sex. Each file was named, and when I saw the name Sindra on a relatively small file, a chill ran down my spine. Sindra was the wife of one of my best friends, John Brown. John was 2 years ahead of me in high school, but we barely spoke back then. He was a jock, I was a nerd. But this nerd helped the jock pass his English class. John excelled in science and math, but struggled with English. Over the semester, we became friends, and after he left for a small college on a football scholarship, we lost touch. When he came back to town after graduation to be near his aging parents, he asked me about work. I was happy to see that his skills lined up with what we needed in the shop. I recommended him for a job, and we picked up our friendship where we left off. A couple of years ago, John and Sindra hit a rough patch. From what I heard, Sindra had gone out for a girls' night and either got comatose or drank too much. Somehow she ended up sleeping with some guy. Ashamed, she told John as soon as she got home, but by then the damage was done. They had 2 young kids, and a divorce would have been disastrous. The Sindra video file was the smallest, and it started with her stumbling into a hotel room. It was clear someone had set up a phone camera on the dresser. She walked like a zombie, staring at the king-size bed. Eric walked into the frame and undressed the disoriented Sindra. At first I thought there was no audio, but soon realized it was because there was no talking. I'd always been impressed by Sindra in a bikini at the lake, but seeing her without clothes left me breathless. I could understand why John didn't want to lose her. I watched the video of Eric and Sindra, and it was disturbing. Eric treated her with complete indifference, showing no regard for her as a person. Just a cold, detached interaction that left no doubt about how little he cared. Afterward, he grabbed a drink from the mini fridge and lit a cigarette. Sindra shuffled to the bathroom, cleaned herself up, got dressed, and left. No words, just a cold encounter. John had always wondered what happened that night, but now I had the evidence if he ever wanted revenge. I invited him over to my apartment to talk. After a couple of beers, he asked what the top-secret conversation was about. "Unbeknownst to you, John, I came across a video of your wife having sex with another guy," I said. "It looks like she was either comatose, drunk, or both. I can tell you who it was, show you the video, or both. Which one would hurt the least?" It took John a while to compose himself. Tears welled up in his eyes, and his breaths grew deeper. I placed my hand on his shoulder, but stayed silent. "Who was it?" he finally asked. "Brother Eric," I replied. "But she can't stand him, thinks he's an idiot. Why would she sleep with Eric?" John's voice was full of disbelief. "As I said, John, she looked out of it. I'll show you the video so you can see for yourself. She wasn't the one making the moves." After watching the video, John's face fell. He now knew the truth. His wife had no idea who the man was and couldn't explain why they had sex. She cried uncontrollably as she confessed everything to him. "Why would he screw an employee's wife like this?" John asked, trying to stay calm but clearly struggling. "It was a one-time thing, and he never contacted her again," she explained, her voice trembling with guilt. "My guess, John, is that he didn't even know her last name. He probably comatosed the most attractive woman in the room and went for it. He didn't care about her name, just her body," I added, my tone blunt. John stood up and wiped his eyes. "Thanks, Joe. Surprisingly, this helps. I'm glad I forgave her before because she was so upset and sorry, but now I know the facts. I'm not sure if I'll tell Sindra, though. I'll have to play it by ear." "Can I have this video, Joe?" he asked, his voice calmer now. "Of course. I think it's the only copy," I said. John hesitated for a moment, then looked at me with a wry smile. Would you be upset if your brother had a few accidents in the next few months? Be my guest, I replied with a shrug. It works in my favor too. I already kicked his nuts once, so I'll be the prime suspect. Just let me know when, so I can have my alibi ready. Thanks, Joe. You're like a brother to me. Yeah, and you're a way better brother than I ever had. We hugged, and as he left, he called over his shoulder, "Keep in touch." I didn't spend much time going over the videos of Carol and Eric. It just wasn't worth it. The thought of it messed with my mind too much. Eventually, I decided to delete all the videos with Carol's name on them. I didn't want to see those two ever again. But as I was erasing the files, fate stepped in and I accidentally hit play instead of delete. When I accidentally played one of the videos of Carol and Eric, I saw enough to confirm what I already suspected. Carol appeared fully engaged in the situation, with no signs of hesitation, and it was clear she was complicit in what was happening. She wasn't lying when she said that with Eric, her husband, family, and friends all disappeared from her mind. Of course, she barked like the witch she was. The woman I had once loved and dreamed of was now humiliating herself like this, and it hit me hard. That moment wiped away every good memory I had of her. 2 weeks later, John came over for a beer to thank me for answering some awful questions that had haunted him for years. He also thanked me for showing him that Sindra had been sexually attacked, not cheating. He had an idea to use the remaining recordings to expose cheating wives and help husbands devastated by Eric's actions. I gladly handed over the rest of the disgusting videos to him. Meanwhile, my job search was progressing. One of Tyndall's main competitors reached out and asked me to come for an interview in their city. It was the first glimpse of happiness I'd felt in a while. I made myself available at any time they wanted to meet. The Donan Corporation, led by CEO Tim Donan, offered me an attractive employment package. The only catch was that I had to meet with the head of Reynolds Resources for a personality evaluation. After everything I'd been through in the past few months, I worried about what they might find wrong with me. The person I was supposed to meet the next morning at 10 was Mickey D. Reynolds, the owner. Reynolds Resources did more than just personality evaluations. They handled HR duties, employee recruitment, corporate governance, and reporting for Donan Manufacturing. Tim had said it took a load off his mind, as he was more of a hands-on engineer than someone who enjoyed paperwork. The office was sleek and modern, a stark contrast to Donan's more utilitarian setup. After giving the receptionist my name, I was offered coffee and a seat on the couch while Mickey D. was getting ready to see me. "No, Mr. Reynolds, it's Mickey D.," she said with a smile. To my surprise, Mickey D. was actually Mickey D. She was an attractive woman, probably in her early 30s. She wasn't fazed when I stumbled over my words as we shook hands. She gave me a firm yet feminine grip that I found pleasing. For the next couple of hours, we discussed my traits, preferences, and my approach to engineering. Our conversation was polite and pleasant. She subtly asked why I was leaving Tyndall. She knew it wasn't appropriate to ask personal questions, but gave me the space to share if I wanted. I was passed over for president and underpaid for the work I was doing, I told her. "Oh gosh, Joe, it's already 11:45. I bet you're ready for lunch. I'll send my report to Tim and he'll be in touch with more details. Would it be against company policy if I took you out to lunch? Like a new employee tour?" she asked with a sly grin. "I'd love to do that," I replied. And so we went out for the first of many lunches, which turned into dinners and more over the next few months. I was slow to jump into a relationship, but I was eager to spend time with her. I really enjoyed her company. From her reaction, she seemed happy with the pace and the development of our friendship. During this time, Tyndall Manufacturing was struggling financially. Even though they had the cash to pay the bills, the money just wasn't available. Edward had to act fast, as vendors and suppliers needed to be paid. He had to dip into his emergency assets to keep the company afloat. The 160 acres of prime land close to town were worth millions, but the thought of mortgaging it sent a chill through the Tyndalls, who had owned the property for over a century. They used the mortgage funds to keep things running until Edward went to the Caymans to gain control of the money. Unfortunately, the damage to their reputation was severe. Suppliers who used to allow 14-day credit terms now demanded cash up front. This severely hurt their working capital, and the mortgage wasn't paid off when the money from the Caymans finally made it back to the States. As time passed, Mickey D. learned the details of the explosion in my personal and professional life. She was understanding, as her world had exploded too. 2 years ago, a UPS truck had run over and eliminated her husband, the founder and driving force behind Reynolds Resources. After his end of life, She had worked tirelessly to keep the business afloat. Meanwhile, John told me that someone attacked Eric in a dark bar parking lot. Eric had taken several blows from a steel pipe. Lying on the ground, he begged for mercy, reaching up with his right hand. The attacker grabbed Eric's middle finger and bent it back until he heard it snap. After a shriek of pain, Eric passed out, missing the admonition from his attacker. That's for sticking your finger in my wife. My job at Donen brought much-needed happiness into my life. I settled in quickly, and since I didn't have a non-compete clause with Tyndall, I started poaching their best customers. They knew I had left the company and were happy to hear from me. I wasn't the salesman Eric had been, but I knew what the customers needed and how to produce it better, faster, and cheaper than Tyndall. Eric, on the other hand, knew little about our products. He just knew they had to be paid for. He wasn't out calling on customers much, as he kept getting hurt, usually after leaving a bar. 6 months after the divorce was finalized, my relationship with Mickey D was fantastic. In addition to being beautiful, loving, smart, and caring, she was a lot of fun to be with. After many dates and growing closer, our evenings became more intimate. Not rough, but full of touching, kissing, and rubbing. One night, it became clear that Mickey was acting as though she wanted to be in bed with me. After dancing a bit closer than usual, she picked up on my sexual interest. As her leg brushed against mine, she looked up with those stunning eyes and asked, "Shall we leave now?" "Absolutely," I replied. Then I kissed her with more passion than I ever had before. We couldn't keep our hands off each other. On the way home, things almost got out of control, but when endorphins are flowing, how could we stop? It wasn't a wild, shirt-ripping contest, just slow, deliberate undressing in her bedroom, both of us exploring unfamiliar territory. Our breathing quickened, heart rates rose. Then, as we paused, she whispered in my ear, "Did you bring protection?" "No," I replied. "I'm sterile. That's why Carol had Eric's baby." "What did the doctor say about being sterile?" "No doctor. My mom told me I had the mumps as a kid, and that's why I couldn't get Carol pregnant." "The same mother who lied to you about your father and encouraged your wife to sleep with your brother? If I were you, I wouldn't believe a word she says. You need a real doctor's opinion." She paused. "Now, let's have some amazing sex." By morning, we'd had sex at least 4 times, and I believed Mickey had probably quadrupled that number. After we'd both exhausted our sexual energy, the topic of my fertility came up. I promised to see a fertility specialist and get my prostatic fluid tested. Of course, I'd have to wait a week until my body recovered. Anything close to the prostatic fluid count I produced that weekend should be fine. After an awkward visit to the doctor's office for the prostatic fluid test, I was told to return in a week for the results. Since Mickey was curious, I asked her to come with me to the doctor's appointment. The doctor didn't take long to inform us that I wasn't infertile. My prostatic fluid count was 25 million, which was lower than average, but not alarmingly so. The normal range is between 50 and 100 million. The mobility of my prostatic fluid was also within the average range. The doctor reassured us that unless we were trying to conceive immediately, there was no reason to worry. He suggested I take some vitamins and avoid excessive drinking, as that might help. His best advice? The best way to get pregnant is not to try too hard. It's a bit like roulette. Your prostatic fluid just needs to meet the egg. With my lower prostatic fluid count, the odds were slim, but not impossible. Mickey D went back on birth control, and I used a rubber. For a couple of months, we decided it was best to wait until after the new year to think about moving in together. But first, she wanted me to meet her parents. She'd told them she was dating a great guy, and they were eager to meet me. I was a little nervous as we drove up to a large but unassuming house. As soon as the door opened, Mickey D stepped in front of me and hugged a man in gray slacks and a red Christmas sweater. She turned slightly to the right and said, "Daddy, I want you to meet the man I love, Joe Tyndall." "Joe, meet my father." I interrupted, saying, "Mr. Donen." "Oops," I said. "Tim, I didn't know you were her father." "Wow, I don't know what to say." "Just say nice to see you, Tim, and come on inside," Tim said. "Why didn't you tell me Tim was your father? Don't you think that would have been something I'd be interested in?" "Yes, Joe," Mickey answered, "and that's why we didn't want you to know. We wanted to see if you were interested in me or my inheritance. Plus, we didn't want you to take heat from the employees for dating the boss's daughter and only heir to the company. Like me, I had a younger brother, but he died when he was 16. So, what does being invited to Christmas dinner with your parents mean for me?" I asked. "Does it change our relationship?" "Joe, it means I love you and want you to meet my family." Business is separate. Since you've told me you have no family, I'm asking you to spend Christmas with mine. Okay, now I get it about Mickey D. The D is for Donan, I said. I really am clueless, aren't I? She giggled and replied, maybe you should have a D in your name for duh. We all laughed, and the tension eased. We had a wonderful afternoon and evening. I genuinely enjoyed spending time with Tim and Mickey's mother, Barbara. Although I was a bit clueless, I got the sense that my request for Mickey's hand in marriage would be met with approval from her parents. I was pretty sure Mickey would say yes, but after everything I'd been through, I didn't want to take anything for granted. My instinct proved right. 3 months later, when I went down on one knee with a blue velvet box in my hand, Mickey jumped off the couch and into my arms. She kissed me passionately, then pulled back just long enough to pant, yes, yes, yes. Then she returned to kissing me as if her life depended on it. Not that I minded her enthusiasm. 3 months after Mickey and I got married, we had a small private wedding. There were no guests from my side of the family, just John, Sindra, and a few new friends. After a relaxing honeymoon in the Caribbean, we returned to my apartment and started our new life together. The first thing we did was decide it was time for Mickey to stop taking her birth control pills. We figured it might take a while for us to conceive, so we were in no rush. We also went to the county courthouse to change our names. Mickey decided to return to her maiden name, Mickey Donan, and I followed suit, changing my name to Joseph Timothy Donan. We felt it was the right move for us both. When we asked Tim for his blessing, he was touched. With tears in his eyes, he whispered, "Thank you, son," which meant a lot to me. Meanwhile, John had found a video of Carol and Eric together, one of the many from their affair, and determined to get some revenge for both of us. He sent copies to several junior and senior boys at the school where Carol worked. The video was titled, Principal Screwing Class 101. A week later, Carol was walking down the hallway at school when she began hearing barking sounds. At first, she thought it was some kind of strange coincidence, but the barking continued, coming from groups of boys in the hallways. When she stepped into the office, it stopped, only to start up again as soon as she left. After the video of Carol and Eric spread, the students at her school began mocking her in the most humiliating ways. Their disruptive behavior, like making barking noises, was relentless, and it completely destroyed her credibility and respect among the staff and students. At first, she tried to ignore it, but as the noise followed her everywhere, she became more and more uncomfortable. The barking grew louder as she walked across the school grounds the next morning, and she quickly realized that someone had spread the video of her and Eric. It was a humiliation she wasn't prepared for. After a tense encounter with Eric at his office, where she demanded to know if he had leaked the video, he claimed he hadn't, saying the video had been hacked and gone viral, but Carol knew the damage was done. Her reputation, her career, and her dignity were on the line. She tried to push through the day, but it was clear that her professional life was unraveling. She bolted from her office and ran home to lick her wounds. The next day, she went back to work, but the damage was beyond repair. The boys at school continued to mock her, and she eventually lost all credibility with the staff, students, and the school board. It was too late, and Diana couldn't pinpoint the exact hour, but she was absolutely certain it was too late for anyone to ring. Even if it was Marty's phone, she wasn't in the mood. She simply buried her face in the pillow, muttering aloud, "Thank you." Just as she finally started to relax, the incessant ringing resumed. She cursed under her breath, reopening her eyes. "Martin, answer your darn phone!" she yelled, only to stop abruptly as she realized her husband wasn't beside her. Glancing at the clock, it read 3:37 a.m. Grabbing her phone from the nightstand, she puzzled over Marty's absence. He was there when they turned in for the night. "Hello?" she mumbled into the receiver, still groggy. "Is this Diana Miller?" came the voice on the other end. "Yes, that's me," she confirmed. "Who's calling?" "Mrs. Miller, this is Northtown Medical Center's emergency room. Your husband was brought in an hour ago, and we had your contact info from a previous incident," the caller explained. "Could you come over right away? There's been a car accident." "Oh God, is he all right?" Diana exclaimed, her worry evident. I'm not authorized to discuss his condition over the phone, ma'am, but please come, the voice on the line urged. Yes, of course, I'll be there ASAP, Diana promised before dashing upstairs to her daughter's room. Dallas, named after the city of her conception, attended a local university but opted to live at home to save money. While she enjoyed dorm life during her freshman year, she soon realized it wasn't conducive to her studies. Dal, wake up, Diana called, gently nudging her daughter's shoulder. Still groggy, Dallas struggled to focus her blurry eyes. Your father's been in an accident. He's in the emergency room. Get dressed. We need to go, Diana urged, already pulling clothes for Dallas. Once dressed, they hurried to the hospital. Dallas bombarded her mother with questions along the way, but Diana had few answers. Arriving at the hospital felt like an eternity, though it was only about 10 minutes due to light traffic. In Martin's room, they were taken aback by his condition, covered in bandages and unconscious. As they filled out paperwork, a nurse dryly remarked, "Your grief doesn't exempt you from paperwork." Dallas scooted her chair closer to her father, and they sat together for about an hour, until a man and woman in police uniform walked in. Good evening, ma'am. I'm Officer Gail Stanton, and this is my partner, Robert Hansen. We were the first responders at the scene, Officer Stanton introduced. Any updates on his condition? Diana inquired. We haven't been briefed yet, Officer Hansen replied. This is my daughter, Dallas. We have some questions for you. I know it's a difficult time, but it's best to address this as soon as possible, Diana explained. Certainly. Can you confirm your husband's whereabouts prior to the incident? Officer Stanton asked. He was at home. We went to bed around 10 p.m. I wasn't aware he had left until the hospital called, Diana responded. Dallas, can you corroborate this? Officer Hansen queried. Yes, we finished watching a movie with Keanu Reeves around 10, then we all went to bed. I saw Dad go to the bedroom with Mom, Dallas confirmed. Did you encounter any significant problems like financial or marital issues? Officer Stanton inquired. Nothing out of the ordinary for married life, no particular problems, Diana replied. I'm just puzzled as to why he left without telling me, she added. Were there any injuries in the other vehicle? Diana asked. That's the thing, Mrs. Miller. It was a single-car crash. According to witnesses, your husband's car was driving normally, then suddenly accelerated into a tree. There were no skid marks and no one saw brake lights, Officer Hansen explained. As the implication dawned on Diana and Dallas, they exchanged a concerned glance. Are you suggesting my husband did this intentionally? That he tried to take his own life? Diana asked, her voice trembling with disbelief. We'll need to examine the car for potential mechanical issues. And of course, we'll speak with your husband when he regains consciousness. It's one of the possibilities we're considering, Officer Stanton explained. Yes, are you certain there weren't any noteworthy problems? Diana questioned. Officers, my husband and I have a strong marriage. There are no issues I can think of. I believe it was just a loss of control or him nodding off. It was very late. It's plausible, she managed before breaking into tears. Officer Stanton left her card on the table, urging them to reach out if they recalled anything else, then departed the hospital. Dallas closed the door to Martin's room. You didn't tell them? She asked. No, Dallas, I didn't, her mother replied, wiping her tears. It's not their concern and doesn't relate to the accident. Your father wouldn't want that. Perhaps he'll mention something when they speak with him. We'll see then. The following days dragged on. Martin remained unconscious in the hospital, while Diana and Dallas stayed by his side as much as possible. They ensured he was never alone. Diana contacted Martin's employer to explain his absence without implying anything about self-destruction. The accident occurred on Saturday night, and signs of Martin awakening finally surfaced on Wednesday morning. By noon, his eyes had fluttered open, though he could only glance around. Diana, noticing his awakening, approached the bed to offer reassurance. Shortly after, a nurse rushed in upon seeing the alert on the monitors. Diana returned to her seat, allowing the nurse to attend to him. Soon, additional doctors arrived to assess Martin. Taking advantage of the moment, Diana stepped outside to call Dallas and inform her of her father's awakening. Receiving no answer, she left a voicemail. As most of the medical equipment was removed, it became evident that Martin's left arm was fractured, but being right-handed, this shouldn't pose a significant hindrance. His throat was irritated from the tube, so a whiteboard was provided for communication. After reading his message, the nurse sought confirmation, which Martin nodded to. The nurse promptly exited to confer with others while tests continued. Mrs. Miller, I regret to inform you that your husband has requested that you and your daughter not be permitted in his room, the nurse relayed.
What? He's my husband. I have every right to be by his side,
Diana protested. I understand, Mrs. Miller, but the patient's wishes take precedence. Let me speak with him. We'll sort this out, the nurse assured. Diana attempted to bypass the nurse, but was stopped. Frustrated, she resorted to shouting, Martin, please talk to me. What's going on? Mrs. Miller, please refrain from shouting. You're disturbing our other patients. You may wait outside if you prefer. However, if you attempt to enter the room or cause disruption, we'll have to ask you to leave the premises. Is that clear? The nurse warned. Yes, of course, Diana reluctantly acquiesced, realizing she had no other option. Dallas finally arrived at the hospital, finding her mother seated outside the room. Mom, why are you here? Dad forbade us from entering the room. Us? I get why he banned you, but why me? What's that about? And why did it take you so long to get here? I had just woken up when Bradley came by to check on me. We're kind of a thing. You chose to be with your boyfriend instead of being here for Dad. I'm sorry, Mom, but Dad was unconscious when I left, Dallas replied, her tone lacking remorse. It was really stressful and I needed to unwind. It helped. For what it's worth, you should call too when you get the chance. I won't do that. Let's not discuss it now. It's disrespectful, Diana retorted, the irony not lost on Dallas, who couldn't help but chuckle. A knock on the door interrupted them, and a tall, attractive brunette entered. She was dressed professionally, but not in medical attire, though her badge identified her as hospital staff. Good morning, Mr. Miller. I'm Dr. Lassiter, one of the hospital's mental health specialists. How are you feeling? She greeted. As well as can be expected, I suppose. It's been 9 days since the accident, Martin responded, now able to speak without the aid of a whiteboard. He inquired about his discharge date, but couldn't get a clear answer. Nevertheless, the hospital asked me to speak with you. It's up to you. If you want to return home soon, I need to clear you for discharge, Dr. Lassiter explained. The psychiatrist responded with a quizzical smile. Then let's get started, Dr. Lassiter said, pulling up a chair beside the bed and crossing her legs. It took her a few minutes to review the documents. All right, so you were admitted a little over a week ago following an accident involving a tree collision. I also see that you've prohibited your wife and daughter from visiting you. I suspect there's a connection there, she remarked. I see, Martin acknowledged. She was unfaithful, he confessed. Unfortunately, infidelity is not uncommon these days, although it rarely triggers such a response. Is there more to this? Dr. Lassiter inquired. Martin remained silent for several minutes, reluctant to discuss it, especially with an attractive woman. He wondered if there was a male psychiatrist he could speak with. Dr. Lassiter waited patiently, accustomed to such hesitance. Finally, Martin began. I think I've been dealing with depression, although it was never officially diagnosed. I just felt down, whether due to something specific or just in general. And then there was the issue with my hardness, which started about a year after the previous accident. Right. It's possible she was aware, perhaps even had access to your medical history. She may have been waiting for you to admit it, Dr. Lassiter remarked. It wasn't even an accident. I was in the back seat. My boss was in the passenger seat and his boss was driving. We were rear-ended. There weren't any airbags or significant damage, but it caught me off guard. I banged my head on the seat in front of me. I reckon that's what caused it, Martin explained. The report indicates you sustained a blow and a mild concussion. My medical team couldn't pinpoint the exact cause, Dr. Lassiter elaborated. None of the medications worked. They conducted numerous tests, some repeatedly, and the most they could determine was that something occurred, resulting in damage to part of my brain. Consequently, I couldn't achieve hardness, which led to my wife growing dissatisfied with our bed life, prompting her to have an affair. This eventually wore me down, leading to the events of that evening. Is that accurate? Martin summarized. In essence, yes, Dr. Lassiter confirmed. How long passed before your wife's infidelity? She inquired. About 7 or 8 months, I believe. We attempted to address the issue through other means. Seeking assistance, Martin replied. Yes, I understand the process, Mr. Miller. I've had carnal relations before, Dr. Lassiter responded. Of course. Sorry, I just feel a bit uncomfortable, Martin admitted. No worries. Anyway, initially everything seemed all right, and we held out hope that my condition would improve. We even discussed spending entire weekends in bed enjoying ourselves. But alas, it never materialized. Eventually, it dragged on for so long that she decided to fulfill her needs elsewhere, Martin recounted. Did she discuss this with you beforehand? Dr. Lassiter inquired. No, I found out when I came home from work early, Martin replied. And not only was she with her lover, but my daughter and her boyfriend were there too, he added. Did they engage in group activities? Dr. Lassiter asked, a note of shock in her voice. No, thankfully. Diana and Bill were in the bedroom while Dallas and Brad were in the living room. That's how I discovered my wife's infidelity, and my daughter was aware and seemingly approved, Martin explained. That explains why your daughter was also excluded, Dr. Lassiter noted. Yes. Oh, and if I haven't mentioned it before, Bill is Brad's father. We knew him coincidentally as our daughter's boyfriend's father. Later, I found out it was our daughter who suggested Bill to her mother. It's another blow, Martin continued. Did you confront them? Dr. Lassiter inquired further. Not exactly. Perhaps if Dallas hadn't been present, I might have confronted Diana, but I had seen enough already. So, I left, Martin recounted. How did the conversation go afterward? Dr. Lassiter asked. Not as expected. She expressed regret that I found out, but made it clear that if I couldn't fulfill her needs, she would seek satisfaction elsewhere. She preferred a committed partner, as she put it, rather than being left alone to find someone new. Bill was single and shared similar needs. So, he became her choice, Martin explained. Your reaction? Dr. Lassiter queried. What could I do? She was right that I couldn't engage in carnal activity. It wasn't her fault. So she did what she felt she had to, Martin concluded. What if, theoretically, she had discussed it with you beforehand? Would you have agreed? Dr. Lassiter posed the question. I've pondered that a lot. Part of me wanted to say yes because I loved her and wanted her happiness, but ultimately, I don't think I could agree to it. We made vows, we made commitments, including in sickness and in health. I couldn't betray that, so I couldn't fathom her betraying me. Obviously, she continued seeing him, Martin reflected. I'm unsure if she increased the frequency since I don't know how often they met before, but previously it was limited to when I was at work. Now it extended to weekend outings, including visits to the store, during which she clearly spent time with Bill, Martin recounted. That must have been challenging, Dr. Lassiter sympathized. Challenging? That hardly captures the situation. Yet again, I felt powerless. She deserved closeness, but I couldn't provide it. It was tearing me apart, Martin admitted. Tell me about the night of the accident, Dr. Lassiter prompted. The whole family watched a movie on TV. I kept my emotional pain to myself. In hindsight, it may have been a mistake, but I didn't want to burden Diana or Dallas. They exchanged goodnight kisses while I received a simple night from Dallas. It was then I realized she had lost all respect for me as a father and a man. I could hardly blame her, as I didn't respect myself either. I prepared for bed, as usual. Diana did the same. Every night, the same routine, Martin recounted. I waited until Diana was asleep, then got dressed, grabbed my wallet and keys, and went upstairs to peek into Dallas's room. She was asleep. I blew her a kiss and bid farewell. I got into my car, knowing there were airbags, but convinced that if I hit hard enough, they wouldn't matter. I had no specific plan, just aimlessly drove around the area. Passing by the large oak tree, I realized there were no obstacles and a direct path. On a second pass, I headed straight towards it, Martin concluded, both he and Dr. Lassiter sitting in silence as they processed the harrowing tale. Finally, the doctor broke the silence. Mr. Miller, I want to express my gratitude for your openness and honesty. It's quite rare. I'll let you rest and reflect on what you've shared with me. Would it be all right if I returned tomorrow? She asked. I'm not planning on going anywhere, he replied sarcastically. They shook hands and Dr. Lassiter exited the room. Martin retrieved his cell phone, left at home that fateful night, and later brought by Diana. Despite her protests, he answered several messages and emails, informing his boss of the latest developments, before closing his eyes in an attempt to sleep. Back at home, Diana struggled to maintain composure. She had initially believed Martin was accepting of her relationship with Bill, seeing it as a gesture of love. However, doubts crept in as she reconsidered the incident. She no longer dismissed it as an accident and feared police inquiries regarding her affair with Bill. While extramarital affairs weren't criminal, she worried about potential implications for Martin's case. Perhaps the authorities concluded it was a self-destruction attempt and closed the case. Yet she couldn't recall Martin expressing indifference towards her affair. Moreover, she refused to accept a life of celibacy due to someone framing her husband's boss. Upon Martin's return, Diana resolved to be more attuned to his emotions and to maintain boundaries with Bill. However, she remained determined not to abandon her relationship with him. The following morning, as promised, Dr. Lassiter arrived. Marty noticed the subtle changes in the doctor's attire. However, he still felt withdrawn. "How are you feeling this morning, Mr. Miller?" she inquired. "Not much different from yesterday, Doc," he replied. "Ready to head home?" she asked. "I suppose, but ultimately it's up to you," he responded. "Partially, yes. However, you're required to stay for 72 hours by state law. The countdown began with our conversation yesterday, so you've got at least 2 more days," Dr. Lassiter explained. "That's all right, Doc. At least the food here isn't terrible," Marty joked, and they shared a laugh. "An oldie, but a goodie," Dr. Lassiter remarked. "I'm glad to see you're able to joke," she added. "Me too. It's been a while, months even, since I felt like myself. I used to be quite the joker, sometimes getting on Dallas's nerves," Marty reflected. "Have you had any other troubling thoughts? Any more dark places in your mind?" Dr. Lassiter inquired. "No, Doc, that's not the case. I spent a year feeling pretty down, but lately it's been more about anger and disappointment. Disappointed in Diana and Dallas, especially Diana, but mostly disappointed in myself for not standing up for myself, for not making it clear to my wife that her actions were unacceptable," Marty admitted. "Do you plan to take a stand now?" Dr. Lassiter asked. "Absolutely. While I'm tempted to just file for divorce, I have to acknowledge my role in letting things escalate. But if Diana agrees to end things with Bill, then I'm willing to seek counseling and try to mend our marriage," Marty declared. "I admire your determination, Mr. Miller. Such a quick turnaround is rare," Dr. Lassiter acknowledged. "I had a lot of time to think while lying here before our meeting. I appreciate you giving me the chance to express myself, to confide in someone. It helped me sort through my thoughts," Marty said gratefully. "Excellent, Mr. Miller, simply excellent. In that case, I'll wrap things up for today. I'll check in with you one last time tomorrow, but I see no reason why you can't be discharged as scheduled," Dr. Lassiter concluded. "Looking forward to it, Doc," Marty replied. Diana and Dallas were waiting to pick him up upon his release. If he aimed to initiate change, he needed to begin by behaving as though change were imminent. The airbags proved surprisingly effective, surpassing Marty's expectations. However, the worst aspect was the concussion, necessitating ample rest in a dimly lit room. With the TV off and soft music playing, his wife and daughter doted on him. Everything seemed fine until Diana mentioned the need for shopping. "No," Marty responded calmly. "What?" Diana retorted, puzzled. "Marty, there are items we require, including your healing creams. Make a list for Dallas. She can handle it," she insisted. "Why drag me into this, Dad?" "Besides, I've made plans with Bradley," Dallas interjected. "Then you'll have extra incentive to expedite the shopping, won't you, Diana? Make the list," Marty asserted. "This is absurd, Martin. You can't just come home and upend everything. Dallas has prior plans and I'm going to the store. End of discussion," Diana protested. "Do you take me for a fool, Diana?" Marty challenged. "Fool? No, Marty, never. Why would you say that?" Diana responded. "Do you think I'm oblivious to these shopping trips serving as a pretext to see Bill? I've never forgotten to return home with groceries," Marty asserted. "Yes, and it's a convenient cover, but you've been away too long. Moreover, I can see it in you, in your eyes when you avoid mine, in your attire that seems off, in your makeup that's not quite right. It's always a bit different." "At least you've been spending time with Bill, and that's over now," Marty declared. The shock was evident in Diana's eyes, and Dallas felt a newfound respect for her father. "Marty, please, we've already discussed this. I'll make an effort to be more cautious. It appears I've grown a bit lax in my meetings. Nonetheless, I won't give up on them. I have a right to a personal life, and I intend to have one." "So our vows meant nothing? To stand by each other in sickness and health? Well, this is part of the sickness. You don't abandon others." "But you'll stop seeing Bill right away. We'll seek counseling to mend our marriage, or else I'll call a divorce lawyer on Monday," Marty declared firmly. "You won't do this, Martin Miller. Don't you dare threaten me. If I could be physical engaged with only you, I would. But circumstances won't allow it. It's not my fault. I didn't cause the accident. I wasn't even involved because I had nothing to do with it. My carnal life is over, and I should just come to terms with it. It's not going to happen, so I'm going to shop, see Bill, and tend to my needs. If you want to discuss it later tonight, we can. But don't think for a moment that you can dictate what I can or cannot do," Diana declared before storming out, slamming the door behind her, rattling the windows. The ensuing silence was heavy. Father and daughter exchanged a glance, then Marty retreated to his bedroom. For the first time, Dallas Miller fretted over her family's future. particularly her parents' marriage. Dad never truly confronted Mom, but nothing this serious had ever occurred between them. Deciding it was their issue and she couldn't intervene, she composed herself and went to meet Bradley. Some part of Diana secretly hoped Marty wouldn't recover because she wasn't certain she could break things off with Bill. Bill was assertive. Bill was forceful. He didn't consider whether his actions suited her. He simply acted. As darkness fell, Dallas returned home to find her father resting in his room. A faint glow emanated from the bathroom, where the light was on and the door slightly ajar. She realized her father desired some illumination, but none of the room's lamps emitted such a subdued light. "Dad?" He remained facing away from her, but responded. "Dallas, I'm sorry." This piqued his interest, prompting him to sit up in bed and turn to find his daughter quietly weeping in the doorway. "What's wrong?" He had ceased using the affectionate nicknames he once called her, after discovering she aided her mother in finding a partner, feeling unsure about it. Despite her tears now, he couldn't shake the feeling that it was all orchestrated. Dallas moved closer until she stood at the foot of the bed. "I'm sorry for what I did. I just wanted to help Mom. She was so upset about what you went through and that you couldn't—" Their eyes met briefly. "Well, you know what I mean." And Bradley's dad had been going through a similar situation since Mrs. Coyle passed. Bradley says his dad always talks about how much he misses her, especially nearby. I thought they could support each other. I never thought about how it would affect you. Is that what you did that night? Marty was taken aback by his daughter's sudden confession. It might have been a ploy, but he had to take her words at face value. If he was fooled, hurt, deceived again, then so be it. "Mostly, yeah. I guess I was pretty down because I couldn't— Well, you know." Father and daughter shared a fleeting smile. "But it's over now, Dally. I won't let it happen again." "I hope not. I need you." "Are you going to divorce Mom?" "I haven't decided yet, honey, but unless she stops seeing Bill, I don't see any other outcome. But keep this between us. She needs to change because she wants to, not because she's forced to." "Okay, Dad. I'll head upstairs." "Oh, I broke up with Bradley tonight." Marty tried to suppress a smile. He hadn't particularly cared for the boy, so this news surprised him, especially considering Dallas seemed to have a crush on him or even be in love. "Why?" Marty inquired, intrigued by this development. "Because," Dallas started, then paused to reflect. "Because my dad once told me he wasn't good enough for me, and I finally realized he was right. I finally saw that my dad was right about a lot of things." A smile spread across Marty's face as he realized his daughter had matured significantly today. Dallas approached her father, embraced him, noting it was the first hug they'd shared in a long while. They pulled apart, exchanged smiles. Then Marty watched as Dallas quietly left the room, heading upstairs until he heard the click of her bedroom door. He heard Diana's cheerful voice as she locked her car. The warm feelings he had just experienced vanished instantly. He lay back down, closing his eyes. Shortly after, Diana entered the bedroom. She'd showered at Bill's, and Marty commented it was better for her to return smelling fresh rather than of lovemaking. "Could you lend a hand with the groceries, please? Did you get everything on the list?" Marty joked, taking a seat. "Yes, Marty. I said I was going grocery shopping, and I did." Marty unloaded the bags from the car onto the counter. He noticed there were no perishables. Glancing at the receipt, he saw she'd left the store almost 2 hours ago. "I went shopping first, then I visited Bill." Despite anticipating it, the sight before him still stung. After unpacking, Marty retreated to the bedroom, pondering whether it was worth reopening the conversation. It seemed futile. Diana had made her intentions clear, leaving him to consider his next move. Change was imperative. "Need to talk some more?" Diana inquired, her tone suggesting it might not be productive. "No, Diana, your stance is crystal clear." Her expression softened, revealing her love for him. He was her confidant, her favorite companion. She believed her pursuit of carnal fulfillment, given the circumstances, shouldn't pose an issue, hoping he'd eventually agree. With a nod, Diana headed to her closet, contemplating rekindling closeness with Marty, but not tonight. By the time she prepared for bed, Marty appeared to be asleep, or at least he put on a convincing act. The divorce proceedings were turbulent. Diana seethed with anger. When the papers arrived, Marty ensured they were delivered home, opting to be with Dallas. Taking up residence in the upstairs guest room next to Dallas's, Diana vehemently opposed the divorce. She retained a highly aggressive attorney who pursued every avenue, even attempting to declare him mentally unfit due to a supposed self-destruction attempt. Anticipating such tactics and believing it prudent, Marty commenced counseling the same week the legal proceedings began. The psychologist he consulted was renowned, and his testimony certifying Marty's mental stability swayed the judge. While the legal battle could have dragged on, Dallas intervened just as Diana seemed poised to escalate matters. Dallas firmly reminded her mother that her actions contradicted their family vows and obligations. Despite life's unfairness, she emphasized the importance of standing by her husband through thick and thin. Dallas warned that further resistance would irrevocably strain their mother-daughter relationship. Confronted with the prospect of losing both her husband and daughter, Diana relented, withdrawing her opposition to the divorce. Their house was sold, with Marty consenting to alimony for a specified period, a concession he knew the court would mandate anyway. Diana secured a 2-bedroom apartment close to her workplace, eventually returning to full-time employment 8 months post-divorce. The dissolution left her embittered, particularly when Bill ended their relationship, revealing his involvement with other women. Diana's allure waned once she was no longer married. Meanwhile, Dallas pursued her education, dividing her time between both parents. Over time, Diana adopted a sufferer mentality, persistently blaming Marty for the divorce. Once more, when Dallas overheard her mother's remark, "If only he were more understanding," she snapped back, "Did you even consider Dad?" Around 10 p.m. on a Friday night, Marty stepped into the dimly lit club, seeking an escape from home. He simply sought a brief, enjoyable diversion. A couple of drinks and perhaps some dancing were all he had in mind. Settling onto a bar stool, he ordered a rum and coke. Sipping his drink, he scanned the crowd and noticed a woman at the far end of the bar who seemed familiar, though he couldn't quite place her. A nearly empty wine glass sat before her. Her dark brown flowing hair and revealing dress caught his attention. Straining to recall, Marty suddenly remembered. A faint smile touched his lips as he picked up his drink and approached her. Just as he drew near, she glanced up. "Dr. Lassiter," he said. She met his gaze, studying his face for a moment, but initially showed no sign of recognition, making Marty question his memory. "I leave Dr. Lassiter at the hospital. Out here I'm Vicky, but I'm afraid you have the upper hand. It's been a while, and I'm sure you interact with far more patients than I do with exceptional psychologists. Names stick with me better than faces. Test me. Martin Miller," he challenged. Vicky pondered the name briefly, and Marty patiently awaited her response. Observing her closely, he almost believed he could see the light bulb flicker in her mind. "Ah, Mr. Miller, a cheating spouse and a rather sudden encounter with a tree, if memory serves." "You're spot on. It's surprising we've only spoken twice, nearly a year. No, almost 2 years ago. It's chance." "Won't you join me?" Marty settled in, signaling for the bartender to refill their glasses. "Thanks, I'm game." "So, what brings you out tonight? Seeing someone special?" Marty inquired. "Trying to," Vicky responded, the glint in her eyes leaving no doubt about her intentions. "Really? I recall a rather impressive rock on your finger, or was I mistaken?" "Not long after my divorce was finalized, I kept wearing my rings, hoping to make my ex-husband, realize he had little in common with a 20-year-old cashier, apart from wanting her friend to join them in bed. Unfortunately, I didn't succeed." "Good Lord. Are they still together?" "Surprise, Mr. Miller, but I lost interest in Wayne's love life post-divorce." "No clue." "A dumb question, admittedly. And please, Marty or Martin, or even, but spare me Mr. Miller." "What did your wife call you?" "Marty." "Well, Martin, care to hit the dance floor with me? I'm game." Martin instructed the bartender to safeguard their drinks before leading Vicky to the dance floor. They swayed to a fast beat, effortlessly syncing up. Another lively tune followed before a slower melody took over. They remained entwined for the duration, swaying gently to the slower rhythm. Vicky wrapped her arms around Martin's neck while he held her close, hands firm against her back. Noticing the absence of a bra, Martin, being a man, was quick to observe. They locked eyes for a moment before Vicky nestled her head onto his shoulder, their embrace unbroken. As the second song began, Martin found himself entranced by the soft, intoxicating presence of this woman. When the music faded, Vicky seized the opportunity of lowered volume to speak softly. "Martin, I've had my fill of dancing, but I'm also feeling quite alone, if you catch my drift," she murmured in his ear. "How about I take you home and we address that?" Martin grasped her hand and guided her back to the bar, settling the tab and informing the bartender they were finished. The lack of surprise from the bartender suggested Vicky had arrived by Uber. They made their way to Martin's car, and he drove them to his apartment. "Vicky, Perhaps I should have asked earlier, but how much have you had to drink? I only had 1 glass of wine at the bar. When you first arrived? Just making sure because I don't take advantage of intoxicated women. Don't fret, Martin. Arriving at his underground garage, they rode the elevator to his floor, Vicky clinging to him the entire time, stealing passionate kisses along the way. As soon as they entered his apartment and the door shut behind them, Vicky swiftly removed her dress. "Oh, Vicky, you look absolutely stunning." "Thank you, Martin. But are you just going to admire?" "I hope not." "Then lead me to your bedroom." Martin took her hand and guided her down the hallway, thankful that Dallas was visiting her mother that weekend. "I hope you have contraceptives." Martin did indeed have a few stashed in his bedside drawer, which he retrieved and placed on the nightstand. After over an hour of passionate lovemaking, they finally came back to reality. Martin lay on his back, with Vicky snuggled up to his left side. They weren't quite asleep, but were in that serene state between wakefulness and slumber. Martin felt rather than saw Vicky lift her head. "Martin, I just recalled the issue of erectile dysfunction in your story. Did that ever get resolved?" "Thankfully, it's no longer a problem." "What happened?" "Well, a couple of months after the accident with the oak tree, I began to feel a tingling sensation, as if a paralyzed limb were starting to recover. This sensation persisted for several weeks." "Were you still married? Did you discuss it with your wife?" "Technically, yes, we were still married, but we had been living apart for a while. And no, I didn't discuss it with her. It didn't seem relevant. Over the following months, I started experiencing morning hardness more frequently, even during the day. After about 8 or 9 months, everything returned to normal." "What did the doctors say?" "They couldn't provide a definitive answer. Despite numerous tests and scans, they couldn't pinpoint any specific cause. Ultimately, they attributed it to a peculiarity of the brain. They speculated that the impact from the tree might have somehow resolved the issue, but it remains uncertain." "Well, I guess I'm fortunate. Would it be all right if I stayed the night?" "All right. Are we planning to have another round in the morning and then grab breakfast together?" As they settled in for the night, Martin had one more question. "Vicky, do you feel ready for a serious relationship?" There was a prolonged silence, and Martin worried he might have overstepped, fearing she might bolt out of bed and request a ride home. Her attraction to him was undeniable, and it wasn't solely based on physical allure. She possessed intelligence, and he enjoyed her company. While it wasn't love yet, she was the first woman he had seriously considered after his divorce. "Can we discuss this in the morning?" "Of course. Good night, Vicky." "Good night, Martin." Vicky woke up before Martin, finding him in peaceful repose, so she decided to let him sleep. After using his shower, she headed to the kitchen to prepare breakfast. Martin's question from the previous night caught her off guard. It wasn't that she lacked attraction to him, but she had been focused on enjoying the moment. For months, she had convinced herself that she didn't need a man in her life, which was partially true. With a good job and supportive friends, she was content. However, if she were entirely honest with herself, she longed for companionship. But how would a decent man react once she shared her truth? Martin was roused from sleep by the aroma of something cooking. He stumbled into the kitchen to find Vicky wearing his shirt from the previous night and sporting the apron he kept in his closet. "I was planning to invite you for breakfast, but it seems a bit late now. How about you invite me for lunch? Go get a quick shower and breakfast will be ready in 10 minutes. Martin joined Vicky in the kitchen just as she was setting up plates. On the table sat an omelet, a couple of sausages, and a piece of buttered toast. "I didn't realize I had sausages in there." "They were in the freezer. Hopefully they're still good." Martin took a bite and complimented the meal. Breakfast itself passed relatively quietly, with Martin taking on the task of cleaning the kitchen since Vicky had kindly prepared the food. They engaged in casual conversation until they finished, and once everything was loaded into the dishwasher, Martin turned to Vicky. "Are you ready to talk?" "Mostly." "Listen, Vicky, I don't want to complicate things or intrude on your life. If you're only interested in a casual encounter, that's okay. You don't owe me anything." "I understand. There's something I need to tell you. Can we discuss it in the bedroom? I'll feel more comfortable there." They held hands and moved to the bedroom, sitting on the bed facing each other. Vicky squeezed Martin's hands tightly. "Martin, although we only met last night, I think you're a wonderful person, and I genuinely like you. But there's something important you should know. I mentioned that my husband left me for a younger woman, which is true, but it's not the whole story. The main reason he left was because I can't have children. He wanted a family of his own and couldn't accept adoption as an alternative. He saw our inability to have biological children as a failure on my part. I'm in my 40s with an adult daughter. While I wouldn't mind having children, it's not a deal breaker for me. Good to know. Another thing I feel it's important for you to understand, well, at least I want to be honest about it. It's something I'm not proud of. After the divorce was finalized, I went through a rough patch. I was grappling with my age and the fact that my husband left me for someone much younger. In case you're curious, I'm 37. I was curious, but I wasn't going to ask. They both shared a slight chuckle. I also felt, well, incomplete, I guess is the best way to put it. Honestly, I didn't feel like much of a woman at all. How can you feel like a woman when you can't have children? I know what you're thinking, but that's exactly how I felt at the time. So I decided to reclaim my femininity. If I couldn't define it through motherhood, then I was determined to define it in other ways. I engaged in casual encounters, mostly with strangers, but there were many of them. I adopted the alias Angela and never turned down an opportunity when I felt like it. This continued for several months until I realized it was self-destructive and sought therapy. Even then, I continued, albeit less frequently, until I reached a point where I could put an end to it. Wasn't that what you were up to last night? Martin asked cautiously. He didn't want to come off as judgmental, just genuinely curious. But there was no denying that last night she was on the prowl. She was unmistakably a cougar. Yes, that's right. As a woman, I have needs, and sometimes I go out to fulfill them. But now, I'm more selective about who I choose. There have been many nights when I ended up going home alone and, well, taking care of things myself. I suppose I should be grateful I passed the test. Of course, Martin. I genuinely enjoy our time together. And to answer your question, I'm keen to explore more, but I want to be transparent about my past experiences. I actually got tested recently and fortunately came out clean, which was incredibly fortunate. I'm not on birth control, but I can provide a note from my doctor if you need confirmation. Assuming you're open to it, I suggest we both get tested and commit to being exclusive. Martin sat in silence for a few moments, processing her words. Vicky waited anxiously but patiently. Finally, he was ready to respond. Vicky, thank you for being so upfront. I know that couldn't have been easy. I think I owe you the same. Our experiences aren't too dissimilar. After my divorce, I was relieved it was over, but struggled with feelings of inadequacy. I didn't know how I'd ever find another partner, and I faced the prospect of being completely alone. My therapist pointed out that, as we age, many women lose interest in lovemaking and prefer non-carnal affection. I thought I'd have to find someone much older than me, or wait a few years until things improved. And even when it seemed like everything was back to normal, I wasn't in the best shape. As you felt the need to demonstrate your femininity, I felt compelled to prove my masculinity. I went out often to pursue women, aiming to establish, at least in my own perception, my prowess. I wasn't any more selective than you. Some encounters were rather casual. Let's just say I've had my fair share of experiences. This continued for a while, but I wasn't as fortunate as you. I faced a bout of gonorrhea and had to confess to my doctor that I couldn't recall the names of my carnal partners. We addressed everything, and through therapy, I started to examine my behavior. It's been a long time since I've engaged with a woman without protection, but I'm willing to get tested and commit to exclusivity. So are we giving it a shot, you and me? Vicky inquired, her eyes blinking, already knowing the answer. I suppose so, Martin responded to this rhetorical question. Martin's stash of contraceptives had been depleted by lunchtime. The inevitable encounter with Diana happened approximately 3 months into Martin and Vicky's relationship. Their bond was strong, and Vicky got along well with Dallas. Although they each had their own homes, they spent every night together, hinting at a more permanent commitment. They decided to visit a club catering to a mature crowd. With a DJ spinning tunes and a layout that facilitated conversation, Martin and Vicky enjoyed their evening. However, Vicky was caught off guard when Martin's smile suddenly vanished, his gaze shifting past her. Curiously following his line of sight, she spotted Diana. Martin and Diana locked eyes almost simultaneously. Martin's expression turned neutral, while Diana's face twisted into a smirk as she approached their table. Despite the passage of time, Diana remained bitter after the divorce. She still believed she hadn't done anything truly wrong, aside from perhaps lacking discretion. However, engaging in extramarital affairs due to her husband's shortcomings wasn't something she viewed as erroneous. As she neared the table, her intention was far from amicable. "Marty, how delightful to see you," Diana remarked with unmistakable sarcasm. "Diana, Vicky, this is my ex-wife, Diana," Martin introduced, though he would have preferred not to. Pleased to meet you, Diana. I've heard quite a bit about you, Vicky offered. Well, I haven't heard a single word about you, Diana retorted bitterly. We're divorced, Diana. It's been over a year. My life is no longer your concern. Now, if you'll excuse us, Martin interjected, implying that he wanted his ex-wife to leave them alone. Of course, Martin. I wouldn't want to intrude on your date, but, Vicky, there's something you should know, Diana interjected. And what might that be? Vicky inquired, glancing at Martin before turning back to Diana. You probably don't want to mess with him. We got divorced because he couldn't perform. Martin observed Vicky closely, awaiting her response while Vicky struggled to suppress a soft chuckle. She turned to Martin, raising an eyebrow. Is that true? I don't recall you mentioning that. Martin simply shrugged, leaving it to Vicky to handle. Diana believed she had the upper hand, thinking she had disrupted Marty's relationship just as he had done with her and Bill. She relished the moment. However, her satisfaction was short-lived. Well, that's fortunate because if what I was writing last night wasn't aroused, then a real hardness would likely finish me off. Diana's smile vanished instantly. Vicky and Martin exchanged glances that subtly mocked Diana's feeble attempt to create a rift between them, leaving Diana looking perplexed. Wait, what is she talking about? Vicky asked. Marty, you're not saying that everything's functioning now, are you? Martin responded. It appears that during infrequent visits, Dallas didn't keep her mother updated on Martin's personal life, Vicky explained. Diana, you're still as sharp as ever, Martin added. Just like old times, Vicky chimed in. But how is this even possible? Did doctors find a cure? Diana pressed, growing more excited. Martin and Vicky remained silent, allowing Diana's agitation to escalate further. Come on, Marty. This issue ended our marriage. I think I deserve to know what was wrong, Diana insisted. The smile faded from Martin's face. Firstly, Diana, it was your actions that ended our marriage, not my condition. You made the choice to do what you did, not me. Secondly, you don't deserve to know anything. We're divorced, and my personal matters are just that. Personal. Please, Marty, you can attribute our breakup to my choices all you want, and I can't argue with that, but I wouldn't have done what I did if everything was normal, Diana countered. All right, Diana, it just happened. The doctors believe that whatever the issue was, after my first accident, it simply needed time to heal. If you had been patient and stood by me through my illness, as our vows stated, we'd still be married. Diana was stunned, her mouth agape as she struggled to find words in response to the shocking revelation. I can't believe this. It's like fate is against me, she exclaimed. He's just upholding the vows, Martin muttered. Curious, Diana's eyes gleamed as she inquired. What was it? Nothing. It doesn't matter now. You know the truth. Could you please give us the rest of the evening? Martin requested. After a thoughtful pause of about 30 seconds, Diana met Martin's gaze with a contrite expression. You're right, Marty. I owe you an apology. My actions were selfish and short-sighted. I should have been stronger. I destroyed a good marriage. I'm truly sorry, she confessed. With that, Diana left not only their table, but also the club itself. Martin and Vicky watched her departure, feeling a twinge of pity for her. Martin then turned to Vicky. Let's dance, my love. 6 months later, Martin and Vicky tied the knot. Before Alex and I were born, my parents lived modestly in a small, close-knit town. My father worked long hours as a mechanic, while my mother managed a local diner. Their life was simple, but filled with dreams of building a better future. When I was born, they were ecstatic, calling me their miracle baby after years of struggling to conceive. My early years were full of warmth and attention, but that all changed when Alex arrived 2 years later. Suddenly, the focus shifted entirely to him. My parents' relief and joy at having a second child turned into overprotection and favoritism. As a toddler, Alex's mischievous antics were laughed off, while my innocent mistakes were met with scolding. The imbalance in treatment was subtle at first, but grew more pronounced as we aged. In school, I excelled in academics and sports, often earning praise from teachers and coaches. Yet at home, those achievements were overshadowed by Alex's smallest milestones. When he joined a soccer team and scored a goal, my parents celebrated for weeks. My trophies and awards collected dust, tucked away in a forgotten corner. One summer, during a family trip to the lake, Alex broke a neighbor's paddleboard. Although I was at the other end of the dock, I was blamed for not watching out for him. That incident solidified my role as the scapegoat. a title I couldn't seem to shake. Meanwhile, Alex continued to bask in their uncritical affection. By the time I reached high school, the rift between Alex and me widened. While I worked part-time jobs to save for college, Alex received generous allowances and gifts from my parents. When I voiced my frustration, they dismissed it, saying, "You're older. You'll understand someday." But the truth was, I never felt understood. Despite it all, I kept pushing forward. I applied for scholarships, determined to escape the suffocating environment at home. When I secured a partial scholarship to college, I thought my parents would finally acknowledge my efforts. Instead, they threw a lavish party for Alex's decision to attend community college, while my accomplishment went unnoticed. That moment solidified my belief that, no matter what I did, I would always be second to Alex in their eyes. At 31 years old, I recently found myself reflecting on the life I had built, which, until not too long ago, included being engaged to my girlfriend of 5 years, Linda. Having spent years navigating a family dynamic that often left me feeling overlooked, I realized how deeply those early patterns shaped my sense of self. Despite my efforts to carve out a meaningful existence, my younger brother Alex, who is 29, has always commanded the spotlight. So Alex was the center of my parents' attention, their golden child. His missteps, no matter how serious, were excused, while I bore the brunt of accountability. Achievements that might have earned me admiration were instead eclipsed by their fixation on Alex's every minor success. Even gifts and celebrations became markers of the disparity, with Alex receiving fanfare and me left with well-meaning but hollow encouragement to be a good role model. Moreover, when Alex decided to attend community college, they even bought him a car. Meanwhile, I biked miles to work and struggled to afford school. Alex eventually dropped out, declaring that college wasn't for him, and my parents praised his self-awareness while bankrolling a series of failed ventures he pursued. Despite this toxic environment, I focused on building a stable and independent life. My accomplishments, however, were always overshadowed by exaggerated tales of Alex's so-called entrepreneurial spirit at family gatherings. I tried to maintain a relationship with him, but it was always competitive and one-sided. I met Linda through one of Alex's friends. She was everything I had ever wanted, intelligent, funny, and kind. For the first time, I felt truly appreciated. My parents, however, were critical of her, questioning why she would even date me. Strangely, Alex took a sudden interest in my life, constantly asking about Linda. I foolishly believed he genuinely cared. After dating for a year, Linda and I moved in together. We were happy and started dreaming of a future filled with love and stability. 4 years later, I proposed, and she said yes. We decided on a long engagement so we could plan the wedding we'd always envisioned. When we shared the news of our engagement, my family's reactions were underwhelming. My mom's smile was clearly forced, my dad didn't seem to care, and Alex's congratulations felt insincere. Not long after, Linda started acting differently. She was on her phone constantly and going out more often. I trusted her completely and brushed off any suspicions. A few months ago, Linda's behavior became even more erratic. She was moody and frequently unwell. I began to hope she might be pregnant, excited at the idea of starting a family. Then one night, my world fell apart. "I'm pregnant," she said, her voice shaky. "But it's not yours." Her words hit me like a truck. "What? What do you mean it's not mine?" Tears streamed down her face. "It's Alex's." I was stunned, my mind reeling. "Alex, my brother, how could you do this?" She broke down completely. "I'm so sorry. I never meant for this to happen. It just happened." "Just happened?" I said, my voice shaking with anger. "How could you betray me like this, after everything we've been through?" Through her sobs, she muttered, "I was confused, and Alex was there when you weren't. He made me feel seen." "Seen?" I spat bitterly. "I was working hard to build a future for us, sacrificing for our dreams. And you—" I paused, trembling with fury. "You turned to him, my own brother?" She nodded, barely able to look at me. "I know I've ruined everything. I don't expect you to forgive me, but I still love you." I let out a bitter laugh. "Love? Don't use that word. You've been lying to me, sneaking around with my brother, and you call that love?" "Please," she begged, stepping closer. "It wasn't supposed to happen. I was lost, and Alex said things that made me question us." "Question us?" I interrupted, my voice rising. "So you doubted me and went straight to him? The same brother who's competed with me my whole life?" Her voice quivered as she tried to explain.
Alex made me feel like I deserved more. Stop!
I cut her off, my tone sharp and cold.
You threw away everything we had for that. I gave you my trust, my heart, and this is what you did with it?
She collapsed into sobs, reaching for me.
I was selfish, I know. I regret it every day. Please, let me fix this. Fix it?
I replied bitterly.
You think this is something that can just be fixed? You've destroyed everything.
Her cries filled the room as I stepped back. I'm sorry, she whispered. I never wanted to hurt you. I love you. I'll do anything to make this right. But I shook my head, the pain and anger overwhelming me. It's too late, Linda. You made your choice, and now I'm making mine. You and Alex can have each other. She dropped to her knees, sobbing uncontrollably. Please don't leave me. I'll do whatever it takes. I stayed firm, my voice steady but cold. You've already done enough. I can't forgive this. Not now, not ever. Her tear-streaked face looked up at me, desperate. What are you saying? Don't throw me out. We can work through this. No, I said firmly. You lied to me, betrayed me, and broke everything we built. Pack your things and leave. Her face went pale. After everything, you're just going to throw me out. Yes, I replied without hesitation. You made your decision long ago. Now I'm making mine. Get out. Tears streaked down her face as she stood motionless, her sobs echoing through the room. Slowly, she began to gather her belongings, each movement heavy with regret. I turned my back, unable to watch. The weight of her betrayal was too much for me to bear. As she packed, my anger shifted to Alex. My hands trembled as I punched his number into my phone. It barely rang before he picked up, his tone casual, almost smug. Hey, he greeted as if nothing had happened. We need to talk, I said, barely keeping my voice steady. A pause, then he sighed. Look, I don't know what this is about, but cut the act, I snapped, my words sharp and unforgiving. I know everything, you and Linda. There was silence on the line before he replied defensively. All right, fine. I messed up, but it was a mistake, okay? It didn't mean anything. She was drunk and... Don't even try to downplay this, I interrupted, gripping the phone tighter. You knew exactly what you were doing. You knew how much she meant to me, and you did it anyway. He let out another sigh, irritation creeping into his voice. I said I'm sorry, all right? But maybe if you'd been a better fiancé, she wouldn't have come to me. His words hit me like a punch to the gut. My breath caught as rage surged through me. Excuse me? I growled, my voice cold and cutting. You heard me, Alex shot back. If you'd been there for her, maybe she wouldn't have needed me. She needed someone who cared. That was it. Whatever restraint I had left snapped like a dry twig. You think you can justify this? I yelled, my voice thick with fury. You think you can say that after what you've done? He hesitated before replying. I didn't mean for this to happen. I didn't give him a chance to say more. I slammed the phone down, my chest heaving as anger consumed me. I couldn't just sit there. I needed to confront him face to face. When I arrived at my parents' house, the tension in the air was suffocating. My parents were seated at the dining table, and Alex stood near the window, shifting uneasily. His eyes met mine, a mix of guilt and defiance. My mother spoke first, her tone careful, almost rehearsed. We need to talk. Alex told us everything, and he knows it was a mistake. Stop, I said, cutting her off. My voice was firm, simmering with anger. You don't get to excuse him. Her face softened, but her allegiance to Alex was obvious. He's your brother. People make mistakes. Family forgives. Family, I said, my voice rising. What kind of family excuses betrayal like this? You've been protecting him my whole life, no matter how much he's hurt me. My father chimed in, his tone cold and dismissive. You're being overly dramatic. He made a mistake. You need to move past it. Move past it? I scoffed. He didn't just make a mistake. He slept with my fiancée. He tore apart my life. Alex finally spoke, stepping forward with a defensive tone. She came to me, all right? She needed someone to comfort her. I glared at him, my voice low and sharp. Don't try to spin this. You didn't comfort her. You took advantage of her, of me, of everything I trusted. He shifted uncomfortably, but his defensiveness returned. You're just making this worse. If you can't let it go, how are we supposed to fix anything? I stepped closer, my fists clenched at my sides. Fix this? There's nothing to fix. You made your choice, Alex. Now I'm making mine. You're not my brother anymore. My mother gasped. I turned to her, my voice breaking under the weight of years of resentment. You've always put him first, every time. Even now, you're defending him like what he did is no big deal. Well, I won't. Not this time. I turned back to Alex, my tone filled with disgust. You wanted everything I had, didn't you? Well, congratulations, you got it. But you've lost me in the process. You're nothing to me now. Alex's voice faltered. You don't mean that. It was a mistake. I laughed bitterly. A mistake? No, Alex. A mistake is forgetting someone's birthday. What you did was deliberate, selfish, and now you get to live with the consequences. I looked back at my parents, the weight of their unwavering loyalty to Alex crushing me. You can have him, your perfect son, but I'm done. I've spent my whole life being second to him. Not anymore. My father's expression hardened. You're acting childish. Family sticks together, no matter what. I shook my head, a bitter laugh escaping my lips. If this is what family is, I want no part of it. You can keep him. I'm done. Without another word, I walked out, slamming the door behind me. The cool night air hit my face, and for the first time in years, I felt a strange, hollow sense of freedom. My heart was shattered, but I knew I had finally done what I should have done long ago. I walked away. When I got home, my phone was flooded with missed calls and texts. Linda begged for forgiveness. Alex alternated between apologizing and blaming me. My parents demanded I grow up and make amends. I ignored them all. I spent days alone, replaying every moment in my mind, trying to understand where it all went wrong. I barely ate or slept, calling out of work and burning through my vacation days. But through the pain, one thing became clear. I was done letting them control my life. Months passed. I moved to a new apartment, started therapy, and began rebuilding my life. But no matter how far I distanced myself, they still found ways to intrude, texts, calls, and now unannounced visits. One Thursday, I found my mother waiting by my car, tears streaming down her face. She clutched her purse like it might solve everything. "Please," she sobbed as I approached. "You're tearing the family apart. Your father can't take this. We can't take it." I stopped, my stomach knotting. "Mom, I didn't destroy this family. I didn't ask Alex to sleep with my fiancé, and I didn't ask you to defend him." Her voice broke as she tried to reason with me. "It was a mistake. Families forgive, son. Don't you want things to go back to normal?" "No," I said firmly. "This isn't one mistake. It's a pattern, and I'm done being second best. I've tried to be part of this family, but every time I stand up for myself, I'm told I'm wrong. I won't forgive Alex, and I'm not coming back." She crumpled onto the curb, sobbing. "You're hurting us. Please, think about this." I stood there for a moment, torn between anger and sorrow. But I couldn't let guilt pull me back. "You don't get to make me feel guilty anymore," I said, my voice steady. "I need to move on, even if that means cutting ties." I walked to my car, slammed the door, and started the engine. My phone rang. It was my father. Against my better judgment, I answered. "Man up," he barked. "This is family. You've been through worse, and you're letting this tear you apart? Forgive him and move on." I gripped the steering wheel, anger bubbling to the surface. "You mean your family, the one where Alex always comes first? I'm not doing this anymore." His voice turned cold. "Then you've made your choice. Be ready to live with the consequences." I hung up, the air in the car suffocating. But I knew I couldn't go back. Later that week, a voicemail from a distant cousin awaited me. "Hey, it's Barbara. I've been talking to your mom. I know things are hard, but family's everything. Don't throw that away. Maybe it's time to forgive Alex." I called her back, my tone sharp. "Barbara, you weren't there. You don't know what happened. I'm done being guilt-tripped into forgiving people who've hurt me." She sighed. "I just thought you might want things back to how they were." "No," I said firmly. "I don't. I need to do what's best for me, even if that means leaving this all behind." Hanging up, I set my phone down. Finding peace wasn't easy, but I knew it was worth fighting for, even if it meant standing alone. Yesterday, Linda messaged me. She's keeping the baby and plans to co-parent with Alex. My parents are thrilled about becoming grandparents, conveniently ignoring all the horrible things they said about Linda when she was with me. Her message was filled with apologies and declarations of true love with Alex. She even suggested we could all become friends for the child's sake. The nerve of it made my stomach churn. I'm at my limit. Part of me wants to sever all ties and disappear, start fresh somewhere far away. Another part is consumed with anger, wanting to stay and make them understand the depth of their betrayal. I feel trapped between the two. This betrayal has consumed my life. I can't be alone with my thoughts, let alone imagine trusting someone enough to date again. I've lost friends who think I'm being unreasonable, suggesting I take the high road and reconcile with my family, as if I caused this mess. The thought of Alex and Linda raising a child together, a child that could have been mine, is unbearable. I know the baby is innocent, but its existence is a constant reminder of their betrayal. Now my parents are urging me to be part of the child's life, calling it my duty as an uncle. The very idea makes me sick. How can I look at that child and not see the embodiment of everything they've taken from me? I've taken steps to protect myself. I consulted a lawyer and initiated a restraining order against my family. I've decided to have no involvement with the child. It's not the baby's fault, but I need to prioritize my mental health. Work has been my escape. HR has been supportive, offering extra security and remote work options. I'm also considering transferring to a new city. Starting over feels daunting, but it might be the only way to rebuild. Linda admitted the affair, and the timeline confirms Alex is the father. Even if the baby were mine, I doubt I could ever separate my feelings from the betrayal. Linda's family has expressed their shock and support. They've cut ties with her and reached out to offer help. It's a small comfort in an otherwise isolating situation. This ordeal has forced me to question whether I even want a family. For now, I'm focusing on healing, one day at a time. The restraining order process has been more complicated than expected. At the hearing, my parents brought an expensive lawyer who twisted the truth, portraying me as irrational and vengeful. They claimed I was overreacting to a minor mistake. Their lawyer's polished arguments made my stomach churn, but the evidence was on my side. My lawyer presented the maltreatment texts, emails, and everything they'd done to invade my peace. The judge listened intently, weighing both sides. In the end, the judge ruled in my favor. "The restraining order is granted," she said firmly. "This behavior is unacceptable, and the order is effective immediately." Relief washed over me, but it felt hollow. My mother sobbed as though her world had ended, and my father's glare was heavy with disappointment. They looked at me as if I were the one who had betrayed them. As I left the courtroom, Alex leaned against a wall, his eyes burning with anger. He stepped toward me, his jaw tight. "This isn't over," he muttered. "You'll regret this." My lawyer stepped in before I could respond. "Back off, Alex," he said firmly. "The restraining order is in effect. Any further contact will lead to legal action." Alex sneered but backed off. "You think a piece of paper will stop me? You can't hide forever." His words stung, but I refused to engage. I walked away, knowing I had taken a step toward reclaiming my life. Even if the path forward is lonely, I won't let them drag me back into their chaos. Last week, everything hit a breaking point. I was in a crucial meeting at work when my assistant nervously entered. "Your mom is in the lobby," she whispered. "She's causing a scene." Dread filled my chest as I excused myself. The last thing I needed was my personal drama spilling into work. When I reached the lobby, I couldn't believe what I saw. My mother stood surrounded by coworkers, flipping through a photo album of baby pictures of Alex and me, telling stories about how close we once were. She was in the middle of recounting how Alex and I used to bathe together as toddlers when she noticed me. Her face lit up and she rushed over. "Oh, sweetheart, I've been looking for you," she said cheerfully. "We're planning a baby shower for Alex and Linda, and—" "I don't want to hear it," I interrupted sharply. "You need to leave now. You're trespassing, and if you don't go, I'll call the police." Her expression froze, shifting from shock to frustration. "I don't understand why you're being like this," she protested. "I'm just trying to make things right." "I don't care," I said, cutting her off again. "Leave now." Before she could argue further, security intervened. I turned away, letting them escort her out, unwilling to engage any longer. She had crossed a line, and I wasn't going to tolerate it. The rest of the day was damage control, apologizing to my employer and smoothing things over with coworkers who had been dragged into the spectacle. While most were sympathetic, I could sense the whispers and judgment. It left a bitter taste in my mouth, a reminder of how deeply my family's dysfunction had invaded my life. A few days later, I was at the gym, trying to burn off some of the lingering frustration. The rhythmic pounding of my fists on the punching bag was a small relief, but the voice behind me shattered my focus. "Still working out, huh?" Alex sneered, his tone laced with sarcasm. I turned, and there he was, standing smugly despite the restraining order. Anger surged through me. "Get lost, Alex," I said coldly. "You're not supposed to be here." He laughed loudly, drawing attention. "Oh, come on, don't be like that," he taunted, stepping closer. "You've got your precious restraining order, but guess what? I'm still hooking up with Linda." That was it. My control snapped. "Leave," I growled, my voice low and dangerous. He smirked. "What are you going to do about it? Call the cops. You think they'll believe you?" Before I could stop myself, I swung, my fist connected with his jaw, and for a split second there was silence. Then Alex lunged at me, grabbing my shirt, and we tumbled to the floor. We fought like children, fists flying. Pain flared as his punch connected with my face, and I landed one to his stomach in return. My vision blurred briefly, but I shoved him off with all my strength. "You're dead to me, Alex," I yelled, but he came at me again, grabbing my shirt. "You're nothing but a pathetic—" He spat, but I didn't let him finish. I swung again, landing a kick. By the time the gym staff intervened, we were both bruised and out of breath. A trainer held me back while another restrained Alex. The gym manager stormed over, his voice cutting through the chaos. "That's enough! If you two don't stop, I'm calling the cops! You're both banned!" Alex glared at me, his face twisted with rage, but he finally backed down. Wiping the blood from his nose, he threw me one last venomous look before storming out. I stood there trying to catch my breath as the manager turned to me. "You need to leave too," he said firmly. I grabbed my things and left, ignoring the stares and whispers from other gym-goers. None of it mattered except putting distance between myself and Alex. As I walked to my car, adrenaline still coursing through me, I couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't the end. Driving home, still buzzing from adrenaline, my phone rang. The number was unfamiliar, but without thinking, I picked up. "How could you?" Linda's furious voice exploded through the line. "You broke Alex's nose. He might need surgery." Her words were so absurd that I let out a bitter laugh. "Oh, my apologies," I said sarcastically. "Did I hurt your precious boyfriend? The one you cheated on me with for months? My mistake." She was silent for a moment, then spoke in a trembling voice. "This isn't about that. Alex is hurt, and the baby can feel my stress. You're being so selfish." My anger reignited. "Selfish? You're really going to lecture me about selfishness after what you've done? You've got some nerve, Linda." She started sobbing, her voice cracking. "This isn't just about us. It's about the baby. Please, try to understand." I clenched my jaw. "No! You don't get to make this about the baby. You made it about your betrayal. I'm done." Before she could respond, I hung up and blocked her number. I wasn't wasting another second on her. The fallout from the fight didn't stop there. Word spread quickly, and my phone was flooded with messages. Some friends offered support, understanding why I snapped, but others criticized me, painting me as the villain. One message from an old friend stung. "I get that you're hurt, but seriously, knocking up Alex was a step too far." Another came from someone I barely knew. "What's wrong with you? He's your brother. Are you really that angry over a mistake? You're ruining everything." The judgment was infuriating. How could they side with Alex after all he'd done? Thankfully, there were messages from people who understood. "You did what you had to do," one close friend wrote. "Don't let anyone make you feel bad for standing up for yourself. You're better off without them." Linda's parents even reached out, expressing their disgust with her behavior and offering their support. It was a small comfort, but I appreciated it. Still, the anger and guilt lingered. The image of Alex's bloodied face replayed in my mind, and I hated that I had stooped to his level. The legal aftermath only deepened the chaos. My lawyer called the next day, his tone heavy with bad news. "Alex has filed attack charges against you," he informed me. I immediately protested, my frustration spilling out. "He broke the restraining order. He provoked me." My lawyer sighed, the weariness in his voice unmistakable. "I understand your perspective, but you threw the first punch, and that complicates the situation. We'll file charges against him for violating the restraining order, but it's not going to be an easy case." A wave of frustration hit me hard. "What happens now?" I asked, feeling cornered. "You'll need to give statements to the police, document your injuries, and prepare for a drawn-out legal process," he explained grimly. "It's going to be humiliating, I'm afraid." I wish I had better news. Giving my statement to the police felt like a gut punch. Explaining how my own brother had pushed me to violence was humiliating. They were professional but detached, documenting every detail as I showed them my swollen face and bruises from the fight. Adding insult to injury, the gym manager called. "After what happened, we have to ban you both," he said apologetically. "It's policy." I swallowed my frustration. "I understand," I said, though I didn't. Losing the gym, a rare outlet for my stress, felt like another blow. Everything seemed to be slipping away, and for the first time in a long while, I wasn't sure how to move forward. Late one evening, my cousin Brenda called, her voice tinged with concern and frustration. Hey, how are you holding up? She asked softly. I let out a sigh. Same as always. Just trying to get through the day. What's going on? She hesitated. It's about the family. My stomach tightened. More drama? Yeah, she admitted with a heavy sigh. They've been pressuring me, especially Mom and Dad, to turn against you. But I'm not doing it. I wanted you to know that. Relief swept over me. Thanks, Brenda. That means a lot. There's more, she said carefully. They've been spreading rumors about you. I stiffened. What kind of rumors? They're saying you're having a breakdown, she explained, that you're jealous of Alex and Linda and can't accept their relationship. Basically, they're painting you as bitter and unstable. I laughed bitterly. Unbelievable. After everything, they still find a way to make me the villain? Unfortunately, yeah, Brenda said. Some people see through it, but others believe them. It's like the truth doesn't matter to them, only their version of the story. I clenched my jaw, trying to stay calm. I'm exhausted, Brenda. I'm trying to heal and move on, but they won't let me. They've already ruined enough. I get it, she said sympathetically. But I'm standing by you. I won't let them smear your name without a fight. Her words lifted a small weight off my chest. Thank you, Brenda. I don't know what I'd do without you. You don't need to thank me, she said firmly. I've got your back. After a pause, I said, it's just frustrating. All I want is peace. But they keep dragging me back into their mess. I can't seem to escape it. I know, she replied gently. But remember, not everyone believes them. Some people see the truth, even if it doesn't feel that way. I nodded, a little more hopeful. Thanks. I'll try to keep that in mind. Before we hung up, she added, take care of yourself, and call if you need anything. I will, I said. I'm lucky to have you in my corner. Same here. Talk soon. After the call, I sat quietly, processing her words. It hurt knowing my own parents were tarnishing my name, but having Brenda on my side gave me some comfort. The tension at work hadn't eased since the incident with my mother and the gym fight going viral on social media. My coworkers were distant, their unease palpable. One afternoon, my manager called me into his office. Closing the door behind me, I sat down, sensing this wasn't a routine meeting. Marvin, he began, fiddling with a pen. I want you to know we value you and everything you bring to the team. You've been a great employee, and we see you're going through a lot. I nodded cautiously. I appreciate that. Thank you. He sighed, clearly uncomfortable. Given the circumstances, I think it might be best if you take some time off. A personal sabbatical. Paid, of course, until things settle down. My heart sank. Work was my only escape from the chaos in my life. I don't know. I started hesitantly. I'm not sure that's the best idea. I understand, he said, his tone gentle but firm. But you've been under a lot of stress, and honestly, you're not at your best right now. A break might help. I clenched my fists under the desk, frustration bubbling up. I'm fine, I said through gritted teeth. I don't need time off. I need to keep working. His sympathetic smile only fueled my irritation. Sometimes stepping back is the best way to move forward. Take the time to focus on yourself. When you're ready, we'll be here. I sighed, realizing he wasn't giving me a choice. Fine, I said, forcing calm into my voice. Thank you for understanding. He looked relieved. Of course, we'll sort out the details soon. As I left, embarrassment and anger warred inside me. I grabbed my things, trying to ignore the stares and whispers that seemed louder than usual. Walking past the break room, I overheard two coworkers talking. Did you hear? One said, chuckling. Alex got Marvin's fiancée pregnant. How screwed up is that? I froze as the blood drained from my face. My first instinct was to confront them, but instead I grabbed the doorknob, yanked it hard, and slammed the door behind me. The sound echoed through the hallway, and I felt their startled stares on my back as I walked away. I didn't stop to explain or apologize, just kept moving, feeling a grim satisfaction at their shocked silence. For the first time in days, I felt a sliver of control, even as the cold weight of my reality settled back over me. It had been an exhausting day. The stress of work, the legal drama, and the relentless family chaos weighed on me. That night, I found myself doing what had become a habit, driving aimlessly. The hum of the car and the steady rhythm of the road were the only things grounding me. The cool night air blew through the open window, but I barely noticed. I didn't have a destination, but somehow I ended up outside the old apartment Linda and I had shared. I stared at the building, memories flooding back, and wondered how everything had unraveled so quickly. A buzz from my phone pulled me from my thoughts, a notification from social media. Against my better judgment, I opened it. The message was from Maria, Linda's younger sister. "Hey, I just wanted to say I'm sorry about everything. I can't believe what Linda and Alex did to you. If you ever need someone to talk to, I'm here." I stared at the message, unsure how to respond. Was this a trap? A ploy for more drama? Or was she genuinely reaching out? Maria had distanced herself from Linda when things fell apart, but her timing felt strange. I typed back, "Why are you reaching out now, after everything?" Her reply came quickly. "I know it's weird, and I get it if you don't want to talk to me, but I couldn't stay silent anymore. Linda's been telling everyone she's suffering, claiming Alex is her true love, and it's all lies. I'm disgusted by it. I don't want you to feel like you're alone. Not everyone in the family is on their side." A mix of anger and gratitude surged inside me. Could I trust her? Was this genuine? "How do I know you're not trying to mess with me like the rest of them?" I replied. "Why now?" After a pause, she responded, "I don't blame you for doubting me, but I'm not like Linda, and I'm not close to her anymore. I've seen what she and Alex are doing, and it's disgusting. They moved in together, and she's playing the sufferer to anyone who will listen. I just want you to have the truth, even if it hurts." Her words stirred something in me, a mix of vindication and renewed anger. I finally typed back, "Thanks for being honest. I don't know what this means, but at least you're not lying to me." "I never will," she promised. I exhaled deeply, started the car, and drove off. Maria's message didn't erase the pain, but it was a rare moment of truth in a sea of lies. For now, that was enough. The calm didn't last. Within days, the gym fight with Alex was all over social media. Someone, probably one of his friends, posted a detailed account on a local Facebook page. They didn't name us, but the description was specific enough that anyone who knew us could connect the dots. The comments section exploded. Some defended me, saying Alex had it coming. "He deserved it," one person wrote bluntly. Others took Alex's side, calling me unhinged and accusing me of needing professional help. One comment even suggested I should be locked up for attack. The negative comments cut deep. No matter how hard I tried to ignore them, the avalanche of judgment was overwhelming. People I hadn't spoken to in years popped up in my notifications, some offering support, others prying for details or gossip. The whispers and speculations spread like wildfire. Everyone wanted a piece of the drama, and I couldn't escape it. The betrayal, the lies, and now the public humiliation, it all felt inescapable. One night, after drinking too much to numb the frustration, I made the mistake of revisiting that viral post. The comments were even crueler this time, and as I read through each judgmental remark, my chest burned with anger. My heart pounded as I hurled my phone across the room. It hit the wall with a loud crack, the screen shattering on impact. I stared at the broken phone, the weight of everything pressing down on me. My life had become a chaotic public spectacle where everyone felt entitled to weigh in, regardless of the truth. The next day, I deactivated most of my social media accounts. The endless notifications, invasive questions, and constant judgment were suffocating. Shutting it all down felt like the only way to breathe, even though the damage was already done. My phone was shattered, and I was left grappling with the pieces of my life. Staying in this city no longer feels like an option. Everywhere I turn, there are reminders of Linda, Alex, and my family. I can't escape the humiliation or the memories. Even the thought of running into them sends a wave of anxiety through me. I've started exploring internal transfers at work. A position in the Seattle office caught my attention. At first, I hesitated. Seattle's constant rain and unfamiliarity felt daunting. But the idea of starting fresh, somewhere no one knows my story, began to feel like a lifeline. The more I think about it, the more certain I feel. A new city, a new apartment, and a chance to rebuild without the shadow of betrayal hanging over me. Leaving everything behind might be the only way forward. Meanwhile, my parents have gone silent since the restraining order was issued. I know this quiet won't last. They're likely strategizing their next move. For now, I'm savoring the rare peace. Linda, however, has been broadcasting her pregnancy all over social media. Maria, her younger sister, told me about the constant posts, ultrasound photos, baby bump updates, and gushing captions about her blessed life with Alex. Each one feels like a punch to the gut, a painful reminder of the future I thought I was building. Despite everything, part of me still hurts. I try to avoid their updates, but sometimes curiosity gets the better of me. Each post is like reopening a wound, reminding me of what I've lost. The decision to relocate became final after a particularly rough day. I had just left another frustrating meeting with my lawyer about Alex's attack charges. The case is dragging on, and the stress is suffocating. Returning home, I found an envelope in my mailbox. The handwriting on the front stopped me in my tracks. Linda's. My first instinct was to throw it away, but curiosity won. Inside was an ultrasound photo and a handwritten letter. I know things have been hard, but I wanted to share some good news. Alex and I are expecting a baby, and we're excited for this new chapter. I hope in time you'll find it in your heart to be happy for us. The baby will be lucky to have an uncle like you. Take care. I stared at the letter, anger bubbling up. Before I knew it, I unblocked Linda's number and called her. My hands shook as it rang. Hello? Her voice was calm, like nothing had happened. Listen, you selfish witch, I snapped. I just read your letter. Are you seriously trying to make me feel happy for you and Alex after everything? There was a pause before she responded softly. I know this isn't easy. Not easy, I interrupted, my voice rising. You destroyed my life, you and Alex, and now you want me to be the loving uncle to your kid? You're insane. You tore apart everything we had, and now you think I'm going to forgive and forget? You're delusional. Her voice wavered. I never wanted to hurt you. I laughed bitterly. Don't lie to yourself. You knew exactly what you were doing. You, Alex, my parents, you can all go to hell. She inhaled sharply, but I didn't let up. I'm not going to play along with your fantasy. That baby is nothing but a reminder of your betrayal. Don't contact me again. There was a long silence. I could almost hear her trying to compose herself on the other end. Finally, Linda spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. I really hoped you'd come around eventually. I shook my head, even though she couldn't see me. Well, you hoped wrong. I'm not going to be okay with this, Linda. And as for your baby, find someone else to play family man. It's not going to be me. Before she could respond, I hung up. I didn't care what else she had to say. I'd said everything I needed to. I tossed my phone onto the couch and started pacing, adrenaline still coursing through me. It wasn't my finest moment, but for the first time in months, I felt like I'd reclaimed some of my power. Later that night, I realized I couldn't keep living like this. The memories, the betrayals, the suffocating reminders of everything that had gone wrong. It was too much. I needed to leave. I needed a fresh start far away from Linda, Alex, and my family. Without hesitation, I called my supervisor. Hey, I said, trying to steady my voice. I've decided to take the transfer to Seattle. There was a brief pause before he replied, sounding relieved. Honestly, I think that's a great idea. This situation has been tough for everyone, and a fresh start might be good for you. I'll fast-track the paperwork. For the first time in a while, I felt like I was making the right choice. Thanks, I just need to get out of here. By the next morning, the transfer was official. I had 2 weeks to pack and leave. It felt overwhelming, but also like a massive weight had been lifted. Word spread quickly, and it didn't take long for my parents to show up at my apartment banging on the door. Marvin, open up! We need to talk! My mother's voice was frantic, filled with desperation. I took a deep breath and opened the door. They stood there, anger and hurt etched on their faces. What do you want? I asked, keeping my tone calm but firm. You're abandoning us, my mother said, her eyes welling with tears. You're walking away from your family. You're throwing everything away. I'm not throwing anything away, I replied coldly. I'm leaving because being around you makes me sick. My father stepped forward, his face flushed with anger. This is selfish and immature. You can't just run away from your problems. You owe it to your family to stay and work things out. Owe you? I snapped, my voice sharp. You mean the family that sided with Alex while he screwed my fiancé? The family that stabbed me in the back at every turn? You two disgust me. Turning away, I walked back toward my packed boxes, their presence suffocating. Marvin, my mother pleaded, her voice trembling. You're going to regret this. Family is everything. You'll see how much you've hurt us. I paused, then turned back to them, my voice cold and steady. Goodbye, Mother. Goodbye, Dad. Don't call me for your funeral. Before they could respond, I picked up my phone and dialed the police. I need assistance, I told the dispatcher. My parents are here violating a restraining order. Minutes later, officers arrived. My parents protested, yelling that I was their son and they were only trying to talk. He's our child! You can't just let him shut us out like this, my father shouted. The officers stayed calm and professional, escorting them to the door. As they left, my mother's voice rang out one last time. "You'll regret this, Marvin. You'll see what you've done." I closed the door behind them and leaned against it, letting out a long breath. The weight on my chest felt lighter. I turned to my packed apartment and muttered, "Goodbye, everything." Then I went back to packing, feeling more at peace than I had in weeks. A few days later, Alex took his shot at retaliation, not in person but online. He posted a long, dramatic message on his social media account dripping with self-righteousness. The post started with, "Some people can't handle seeing others happy." He painted himself and Linda as a couple rising above hate and negativity, focused on their love and future together. He claimed they were embracing their new chapter with positivity and grace, while others, clearly referring to me, clung to bitterness. The comments were flooded with support. People praised them for their resilience and called them an inspiring couple. Some wrote about how they admired their ability to stay strong despite the drama. I stared at the screen, fury bubbling up inside me. He was twisting the truth, painting himself as the sufferer while making me look like the bitter, unstable one. Seeing the outpouring of support for him and Linda made me sick. Reading the comments, I felt a sting I hadn't expected. Strangers who knew nothing of the truth were blindly siding with Alex. Their support hurt more than I cared to admit, but I reminded myself it was all a facade. Alex wasn't a sufferer. He was a liar, a man who had betrayed me, destroyed my life, and fractured his own family without hesitation. Despite my anger, I forced myself to take a step back. These people didn't know the truth. They didn't understand the pain Alex had caused or the pieces of my life I was still struggling to put back together. Yet, they celebrated him like some kind of hero. It was infuriating. I took a deep breath, set my phone down, and walked away. Engaging with them wouldn't change anything. It would only pull me deeper into their false narrative. No matter how many likes or comments Alex got, I wouldn't let him drag me down. My focus had to be on rebuilding my life, not dwelling on their ignorance. They didn't know the truth, and they never would. What mattered now was moving forward, no matter what anyone else thought. Then came the unexpected, Linda's reaction. After our heated phone call, I assumed she'd continue playing the sufferer, spinning more tales to gain sympathy. But according to Maria, my words had shaken her more than I realized. Maria, who had become an unlikely ally, called me one afternoon. "Linda's a wreck," she said. "She's been crying nonstop since you called her. I don't think she expected you to lash out like that." I could hear the frustration in her voice, mixed with disbelief. "What, she didn't think I'd finally tell her how I feel?" I asked, unsure if Linda was genuinely upset or just trying to manipulate the situation. "She's not blaming you anymore," Maria said softly. "She admitted to me that what she and Alex did was awful. I don't think it really hit her until now, but she feels trapped in this mess she's created." I paused, processing Maria's words. Trapped? She and Alex chose this. They can live with the consequences. "I know," Maria replied, sounding conflicted. "But she's scared. She thought Alex would be stable, that he'd step up. Now that she's pregnant, she's realizing how reckless he is. She told me she doesn't feel secure. She doesn't know how they're going to make it work." Hearing that hit harder than I expected. Linda had spent so much time projecting confidence about her new life with Alex, but now it seemed like reality was sinking in. I always knew Alex was reckless and unreliable, but hearing Linda admit it to Maria made it clear how shaky their foundation really was. "She says she's stuck," Maria continued. "She's terrified. She keeps saying she thought Alex would step up, but now she's not sure." I felt a mix of vindication and pity. Linda had convinced herself she was in control, making the right choices. Now, faced with the reality of her decisions, it seemed like the weight of it all was crushing her. "What do you want me to say, Maria?" I asked, shaking my head. "She brought this on herself. I'm not going to be her safety net, and I'm not going to pretend we're fine." "I understand," Maria replied, "but I thought it might help to know that she's struggling. I think she's finally realizing how badly she messed up." I didn't answer right away. Part of me wanted to tell Maria that Linda deserved whatever came her way. Another part felt a strange kind of pity for her. Linda had always tried to appear strong, but now it was clear she was unraveling under the pressure. "She's done too much damage," I said finally. "I can't help her." "I get it," Maria said gently. "I just thought you'd want to know. She's not as confident as she pretends to be. She's scared about the future." After we hung up, I sat quietly, processing everything. Linda's breakdown didn't bring me any joy. It didn't undo the betrayal. But it did show me that her and Alex's life wasn't as perfect as they wanted everyone to believe. Their house of cards was starting to fall apart. My cousin Brenda came by to help me pack and, as usual, brought me up to speed on some family drama I hadn't heard. She told me my aunt, my mom's sister, had confronted my mom in a heated argument, accusing her of favoring Alex while always sidelining me. Brenda said my aunt didn't hold back, telling my mom that her years of favoritism were finally coming back to haunt her. Hearing that someone else had called them out felt oddly validating. On the legal front, my lawyer assured me the move wouldn't impact the case. We're still pursuing charges against Alex for breaking the restraining order and his bogus attack allegations against you, he said confidently. The judge will see through his claims, especially with his history of violating the order. Moving across the country will also demonstrate that you're not a threat, which strengthens your case. Then I left town. It felt surreal. Now, here I am in Paris, a city I once thought was only a dream. The chaos and toxic family dynamics are behind me, and I'm on the cusp of a new chapter. 3 years later, as the sun dipped low over the Seine, I stood at the altar, waiting for Elise. The chapel was small and intimate, just the way we wanted. The quiet hum of the city faded into the background as I focused on this moment. The vows we had written still echoed in my mind, but a small part of me couldn't help thinking about the empty seats where my family should have been. My phone buzzed in my pocket. It was a message from my mother, though I'd blocked her number. Somehow she always found a way to reach out. Without even reading it, I swiped it away. "Not much longer now," Paul said, offering me a reassuring smile. He had flown in from the States to stand by me. "You all right?" I nodded, my voice catching. "Yeah, just thinking." "About your family?" I let out a deep breath. "I haven't heard from them in years. Not that it matters. My mom tried reaching out once after everything, saying she was sorry that they missed me and wanted to fix things, but I've heard it all before. I'm not reopening that door just to have it slammed in my face again." Paul gave me a knowing look. "So, no regrets?" "No," I said firmly. "It hurts, but it's the right decision. Elise and I are starting fresh, and I can't keep letting the past drag me back. They're not part of my life anymore." Paul grinned. "Sounds like Elise has been good for you." "She has," I said, smiling. "She's calm, steady, and strong. The anchor I didn't know I needed. She's been with me through everything, even when I thought I didn't deserve it." "She sounds amazing," Paul said. "And you deserve this, man. You've been through hell. It's time for your happy ending." Just then, the chapel doors opened, and Elise walked in, radiant in her dress. As she made her way toward me, a sense of peace washed over me. The weight of everything I had left behind lifted, and for the first time I felt completely free. Months later, whispers of Linda and Alex's unraveling found their way to me. Maria, as always, kept me informed. One evening she messaged me with the latest. "Linda cheated on Alex," Maria said bluntly, "with some businessman she met through work. It didn't take long for her to lose interest in their life together." I wasn't surprised. "She's back to her old ways?" Maria sighed. "Pretty much. She was never happy, just pretending to be. Now she's wrecked things again." Their rushed relationship, the lies, the betrayal, it was all bound to implode. I'd seen the cracks from the beginning. Linda had convinced herself Alex could provide stability, but it was clear she couldn't escape her own patterns. "Some people never learn," I replied. Maria didn't argue. She understood I wasn't being cruel, just honest. "Do you feel sorry for him at all?" Maria asked after a pause. I thought for a moment. "Not really. I don't wish him ill, but he made his choices. He knew who she was, and he still went after her." "Yeah," Maria said. "I just wish he'd seen it coming sooner." "They both made their bed," I said, glancing out at the quiet street. "Now they have to lie in it." Linda and Alex made their choices, and whatever comes next is on them. My focus now is on my own life, and Elise is right here with me, helping me build something genuine, something untainted by the past. That's all that matters. The anger is gone. In its place is a quiet sense of peace, a calm I've never felt before. With Elise, I found the happiness I've been searching for. Right now, we're in Thailand on our honeymoon, and every moment feels surreal. We've spent our days exploring colorful markets, relaxing on pristine beaches, and indulging in incredible food. The simple joys of this trip feel like everything I've ever needed. Looking back on everything, I can finally say I'm free. Free from the weight of the past, the toxic relationships, and the constant manipulations. Elise understands me in a way no one else ever has. She brings out the best in me, and with her I've found a love that feels solid and real. She's my partner, my future, and the center of my world. My family isn't part of this journey, and they never will be. I've realized I don't need them. What matters now is the life Elise and I are building together, the love we share, the adventures we're living, and the future we're creating. Sitting here in one of the most breathtaking places I've ever been, I feel content. I've let go of everything that held me back, and for the first time in years, I'm truly happy. Happier than I ever thought possible. This is just the beginning, and I can't wait to see where the next chapter takes us.